Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Lights, Camera, Accolade. Today, we're going to be discussing the 6th Academy Awards. I'm Sarah.
Jake.
I'm Chrysantha.
And I'm Abby.
So first and foremost, I did want to at least mention that this is the last year of pre-code movies that we're going to watch, because in the 7th year, all of the movies that came out in between this year and the next strictly adhered to all of the rules that we've talked about with the Hays Code. So,
interesting.
Yeah, really curious to see how big of a shift we'll see. And yeah, before we jump into the nominees, I don't know if we have some historical context, because obviously we're still in the midst of the Depression, and I feel like we're starting to see trends in movies that speak to like choices they were making for films because of that. Like a lot of very, very similar themes, which we can get into when we talk about the nominees.
You know what I felt when watching these movies is that I don't think that we've talked about a whole lot is Prohibition. And 33 is, I believe, when Prohibition ended. I believe when Roosevelt was elected in 32. Part of the reason that he was elected was because of his promise to end Prohibition. Prohibition being the illegalization of alcohol consumption. And I think that it's really interesting to see there's a ton of alcohol drinking in a lot of these movies. And I think it's also really interesting to see the timing of that, of maybe potentially as Prohibition started to trend towards ending, of seeing a bigger rise of that in movies. And then I also wonder if that maybe led to kind of the social pressure to really enforce the Hays Code as well. Of like, can't have this, but I guess we're going to have this instead. I don't know. That's just wild speculation.
It's kind of crazy to realize that it's just ending now, because we talked a little bit about it, because there were a lot more movies dealing with the illegality of it. Like The Racket was one big one, and The Alibi, where it was like, oh, these are people who are smuggling alcohol in and stuff. So that seemed prevalent at first. And then drinking in a lot of these movies, because it's been every year, you know, it's been treated either kind of normal, like there will be some alcohol at parties or whatever, or it'll be kind of like jokey. I do agree that this year they really amped it up, probably because of the reasons you're saying, but because there was never like a big absence, it never really felt real that it was illegal, but it absolutely was. And you know, there's all sorts of crime related to that and different like social pressures related to that. It just doesn't feel like it when you watch these movies.
Well, it reminds me of marijuana more recently, where a lot of the culture knew that it was pretty ubiquitous and people would do it, but it was still not something that was done in the open. And that would seem to be pretty clear, you know, in some of the earlier movies when they talk about the trade itself and the black market for it. But now, as you say, we're seeing open scenes, big parties, public places where it's becoming the norm again. So that's a good point, Ab, because there's a lot of things about the movies this year that made my brain go, this might have prompted the enforcement of the Hays Code, but that actually wasn't one of them yet. So I think you make a good point, and that makes total sense.
I also wonder if it's just like, yes, everyone's poor and struggling, but at least you can drink again. You know, it's like,
hey man, I've been there.
At least there's that. But World War I became a popular theme again, was the other thing that I was noticing.
Yeah.
We had a lot of movies that were either set during the war or dealing with veterans. And I can't help but to think that there's some part of the brains of studio execs where they're like, maybe if we remind them of worse times, they'll be happier with these bad times. You know?
I do think the thing that was really interesting, like, yeah, there's the World War I thing. Definitely. That's a theme of we've got a bunch of World War I stories, but we have just a bunch of period pieces generally. Like so many of these, particularly the movies that have well-off individuals in them, are period pieces. And then our movies that are actually set in a more contemporary timeline are the movies that are featuring, you know, destitute apple sellers or World War I veterans who have failed to find a life after leaving the army.
Right.
I think that's really interesting. You have more rural or poor characters than I feel like we've seen in a given year.
Definitely. Unrelated to the history of the times, I did find out that during this Oscars ceremony, we had the first La La Land Moonlight moment.
Oh my gosh.
Which,
Really?
Yes, at least not millions of people watched this, but apparently Will Rogers was the one hosting when he announced Best Director. All he said was, "Come on up and get it, Frank." And there were 2 Franks nominated that year for the Oscars. And so Frank Capra, who was the one who directed Lady for a Day, just assumed it was him.
Oh.
So he went up, but it was actually Frank Lloyd for Cavalcade. So it was just this whole moment where now they just tried to make it this amiable, like, yeah, like everyone come up, look at us. We're all having a great time. And then I don't know what possessed Will Rogers, but apparently for Best Actress after that, he called up the 2 nominees, who were Mae Robson, who played Apple Annie in Lady for a Day, and then Diana Wynyard for Cavalcade. And so they thought they won in a tie because they got called up at the same time specifically. And then he was like, "Thanks for your performances. The winner is Katharine Hepburn for Morning Glory." Like, what is he doing?
What a troll.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It sounds like Will Rogers was taking Prohibition very seriously for the entire period of it. And then when it got turned off, he really cut loose. And it just so happened to be that night.
Yeah, that's like the only thing I can think. It's like nerves and potentially alcohol or drugs or something, because you messed it up once. And then maybe in his brain, he was like, okay, but if I just try to make this a thing where multiple people
dude.
come up, but what a mess. I don't know if he hosted it after that ever again. I would have to check, but if I were in control of that, I'd be like, Will, maybe you should just be part of the audience. Like, maybe not host.
Way later,
God.
but nothing for me will ever beat John Travolta saying Adele Hazim or whatever he said for Idina Menzel. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
Oh God.
See, this is the double-edged sword of modernity where these things live forever now. We will watch it on a repeat.
Will Rogers, everybody forgot the next week.
Exactly.
John Travolta, his life's in the toilet now.
And it's all because of the Oscars.
John Travolta's career ruined because of that one Oscar.
Not because of Scientology. Thank you very much.
Yeah, nothing else contributed to that whatsoever.
Well, I'm about ready to jump into the nominees. I don't know if we have other context, but I know we watched a lot of movies.
It was worth noting, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first year as president, and he's my favorite president, just saying.
Nice. I know, is this when like the New Deal comes into play?
He did a lot in his first 100 days, a little bit like our current president, except for vastly different reasons. And the New Deal kind of came into form, you might say, over the first couple of years of his presidency. But really, in the first 100 days, he did a ton. All designed to pull the United States out of the economic tailspin it had by now been in for several years. So a lot of just people rethinking the role of the government in their lives, starting to expect, more from it. And that's because Roosevelt he was not an ideological president. His goal was to kind of save the system and just stop the bleeding. And so he was very open-minded, and being from the upper classes himself, the thinking was like the famous Nixon goes to China thing. He was in a position, people trusted that, he wasn't trying to do communism or anything. So he brought in a lot of experts and folks that were ready to experiment with different types of policies. And, some were successful, some not as much, but ultimately it really changed over the course of the decade the way people thought about their government and the way people thought about being Americans. So I expect, and I know that starts to be reflected in the culture and in the movies moving forward.
Yeah.
But this is the first year where that's starting to happen. So interesting to keep in mind.
All right. Are we ready to jump in?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay. 42nd Street is a show about a show type movie. The story follows the development of a musical theater performance and culminates in the show's debut night. Nominally, 42nd Street is about competent, capable women laboring, literally and figuratively, under socially powerful but ultimately either useless or myopic men. In reality, 42nd Street is unabashedly about 50 women's naked legs.
So speaking of those naked legs, I feel like one of those final shots in the movie when we have all of that like great musical number sequences had to have inspired The Big Lebowski, like during the dude's fever dream where he's like just kind of floating through the bridges of like women's legs, because it is that same sort of camera moving through just like legs and legs and legs and legs and legs until you see like the final shot of the couple or whatever. So I was like, oh, I see you.
Yeah, it was an interesting movie and very stress inducing for me. If anybody's ever been involved in a theater production, this is a very kind of behind the scenes look at a lot of the hijinks that can go on in the lead up to that, especially when things don't go right. So we have, you know, the main actress with a big personality who ends up not being able to perform opening night. Then you have the humble understudy who jumps in at the last minute with some hands-on direction from the director to prepare her. And ultimately, it all culminates, like you guys were saying, in a really visually kind of stunning final spectacle that I imagine, you know, for folks at that time in the height of the Depression to go out and see that on screen, you know, as kind of a replacement for going to the theater, not having the money to do so or not being located near one. Must have been a cool little escapism moment for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, I do think that the end of the movie where you actually get to see the show that they're putting on, which is a frankly nonsensical show. I don't understand the plot of this.
Yes,
like,
It's not about, yeah.
However, like, I think it's fascinating that it starts with these ambitious, spectacular set pieces, like with this train car set that they're moving through. But this makes sense to live on the stage that they're on. Like, you can imagine that could actually be staged that way.
Yeah.
And then as you go through this show, the staging and the production design becomes more and more spectacular and eventually fully like breaks the boundaries of what would even be possible to put inside a theater. That's like the best, most fantastic part of that movie, of where it starts to like bend reality of what is possible in a stage show versus what you can do with a movie. I think that part of that is spectacular and really, really interesting and cool.
Well, Abby, in your description of the movie, it started to make me think about it a little differently in a more deep way. But it's very interesting that all the labor for the play, all the talent, all the hard work is really on the part of these great female dancers and performers. But all throughout the lead up to the play, you have like this army of males who are running every aspect of the production and the lead up to the production. And the movie even jokes about this, that a lot of them are kind of like inconsequential or unnecessary. Like I remember there's like 3 or 4 guys whose seemingly its job is to just shout quiet on the set, like almost like lookout posts, setting off the alarm to each one, like around the room, like quiet on the set, quiet on the set, quiet on the set. It's like, what else are you doing? And then there's that great joke of the one is kind of fallen asleep behind the curtain, and then he hears something or wakes him up, and his immediate reaction is just yell quiet on the set before he even knows what's going on. Like a trained monkey.
Yeah, that was a good spot.
Got a laugh out of me, but yeah.
It's actually adapted from a novel by Bradford Ropes, and the novel was meant to really showcase that aspect of what it means to be in show business, particularly for showgirls. You know, how they have to put in just like a ton of work and labor and effort and have really tough working conditions. And it's ultimately a thankless job, right? You're a member of the chorus. You're there as a background, even though you're having to give so many hours and really push yourself to the limit. So it was meant to highlight those things. And I think the first 3/4 of the movie really does that, because that's what it's focusing on. But then by the end of it, when you see the show, you're like, it was worth all that work. No working condition changes.
I wrote in my notes, Hitler-like director, vindicated in the end? Question mark.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, yeah, they're making that point, but then like so many movies, they're like, well, I don't know. Like the abuse of Jackie Cooper is going, well, he did get nominated.
True.
I don't know.
What did I say?
Something's working.
You got to go to the lens to pull it up. But I did think his style of the stick rather than the carrot, I mean, it just seemed like the most unfun production to be involved with. Because every night he was screaming at this army of performers like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. None of us are ever going to work again. I'm going to have another mental breakdown. And like, if that was the vibe every night leading up to the show, like, why are you in this business? But his methodology appeared to work.
I love that was like his role in the movie, and then meanwhile there's like romance happening behind the curtain, and this drama happening between the starlet and her I guess like simp boyfriend, and also the guy that she's sleeping with to fund the production. Like it really interesting things of like this man is having his own personal like Caesar like drama, and then everyone in the background is going on about their lives despite this.
It's like Sarah directing our podcast. She has to check in with us all the time. I have therapy sessions. I'm losing a joke here. I don't know. We can cut this.
Oh, God, these people are so hard to work with. Just kidding. I did want to mention, I don't know if you noticed, Jake, but Warner Baxter as Julian Marsh, first of all, he as the director was great, but he played the Cisco kid.
I did, I remember the
Arizona.
name.
Yeah.
I was like, where's your accent, Cisco? And then I also wanted to mention, I told Sarah this, I'm pretty sure that 42nd Street song we did at musical theater camp when I was a teenager. Because as soon as it came on, I was like, hey, I know this song. I love this song.
Amazing.
I hope you practice because now you have to sing it for the pod.
Bonus episode, yeah.
I did also want to at least throw out there that I know this is the first time that we've seen Ginger Rogers.
I was going to say, we got to call her out. She's amazing.
Yeah, she was so amazing in this. And I know she worked a lot with Fred Astaire. Like, that's the main reason that I feel like I know those two names because of their just very famous duo. But I'm hoping that we see more of them and kind of what made them such famous icons, because loved her in this, but would really want to see something that highlights her because she's just kind of a side character in this.
Yeah, but her trotting around with that little dog and the monocle and her fake accent is so funny and good.
Other fun note, it was so successful that it saved Warner Brothers from bankruptcy at this time.
There's a lot of that
revived. Yeah, I know, because it's like everyone is at the brink of bankruptcy. So this year, any hit was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, I will say, I think it's really interesting to see kind of like the disparity in filmmaking techniques.
Yes.
I would guess it is the disparity, like different ethoses, right, of studios being like, we're going to throw $1 million at this and hope to God that this does something because we must make money on this, versus maybe potentially a little bit more conservative folks being like, okay, let's not spend quite as much money on this, because there are places like there's a real difference in like how these movies look and feel between each other.
So
like,
true.
Some are very stagey and some are very, like, for lack of a better word, cinematic.
Yeah.
And I think I feel like I really feel a dollar working hard in every one of these movies, even if I mean, I didn't look up the budgets, but it feels like you can really see money versus how expensive things are and like where they're choosing to spend their money, which is really interesting. I also think, I don't know about y'all, but this is one of the first years where I really feel a disparity in print quality preservation, where some of these movies have really beautiful prints still that we're able to see. I know some of these and some of them have not so great prints that are like available to watch, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I did notice that too. I don't think we watched them in order and when each nominee came out, but I know since we started 42nd Street, that's the first thing I noticed was, one, how clear the picture was, and sound quality as well. I could actually understand more of what they were saying. And then I also felt the writing was also improved upon, because I would say this is one of the first years when we're watching all the nominees where a majority of the films like held my interest. There were a few on this list that I'm just like, I was really fighting not to fall asleep. But like 42nd Street, I'm not going to say it was like my favorite. There were aspects of it that I really liked. Like, I think you guys already talked about, you know, like with some of the shots, like I felt like there was a lot of, I guess it would be called like camera tracking, where you're kind of in this point of view and it's showing you, like leading the audience, you know, either down some kind of stage set that they have, or you have like an aerial shot of how they stage the people. Like there's that one shot where it has them pull out this like gold or silver kind of sheet and they're waving it back and forth, so it kind of creates an optical illusion and it's like in a circle. And if Hollywood Review were shot in the same way how they did all the kind of like stage magic for the show, I feel like it would have been a very different movie, because this was a film, but it was also at the same time you're watching a play as well. And I thought that they did a really good job at adapting whatever play that they're creating in the film or for the film. They also did a really good job at filming it and allowing the audience to be a part of that play as well. Because that was the one thing that I really liked, was at the end when you finally got to see the musical number and how much work went into it. And by the end of it, like I liked pretty much all the songs, like You're a Habit to Me or something like that was pretty catchy. And then Shuffle Off to Buffalo was another one that was really catchy. I think we've only seen like maybe one or two other movies that were considered musicals, but I feel like this one has really, like, it really kept me invested in the story. And then at the end, like, kind of tied up everything in a very neat bow. And then I thought that asbestos curtain at the end was funny.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was
so glad you
jump
mentioned the
scare.
asbestos curtain.
Jump scare. Yeah, a jump scare for us now. But I know because at the time asbestos was used, you know, as like a flame retardant. So like fire wouldn't spread. And so the joke there being that like, ooh, whatever's happening behind that curtain must be really hot, you know. But as modern viewers, we're just like, girl, we got a different idea of what asbestos is. Anything else on 42nd Street?
All right. A Farewell to Arms is a dreamy, sensual adaptation of Ernest Hemingway's hauntingly cynical novel by the same title, starring Gary Cooper and Helen Hayes, who we last saw playing the wife in Aerosmith. The movie details the transformative love affair of an American lieutenant in the Italian army and an English nurse in World War I. It's surprisingly tender filmmaking for a movie bookended by corpses.
Yeah.
I like how you called out that Helen Hayes was also in Aerosmith because, like in Aerosmith, she cannot survive a movie.
My
Like,
girl
she
is
just-
getting typecast with the reservation. I think she's really excellent in this. I think like the director uses her big, huge, beautiful eyes really to do so much in this movie. Like literally, there's that really cool shot where first person point of view as he's being transported through a hospital where you see the frescoes of the ceiling kind of as his cot or gurney or whatever it is gets taken down the hall and then kind of ultimately culminates in a bunch of people talking to him. So like leaning over the camera. And then she finally comes into the room and gets so close to the camera that the only thing you can see is her big, huge eye. Really spectacular. Love that some of the filmmaking choices in this in terms of how the camera is used and what it's doing are really, really cool. So when they're doing all of the like battle sequences and montages and that sort of thing, and you have all these huge crowds, I think it's really clever use of costuming is they put Gary Cooper in a coat that is like 3 shades darker than everyone else's coat. And it's not something that you really notice like you would if it was in color, but because it's in black and white, what that does is it really serves to anchor him in the scene. So like no matter how many people are on the screen, you know, how chaotic it is, your eyeball always manages to find him because he's the figure who has the highest contrast in the shot, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that is cool.
Just a great looking movie.
One additional like camera work thing that I noticed a lot in this movie was that there were a lot of weird close-ups of feet. Like, I don't know if you caught on to this, but there were sequences where it's just like literally holding a woman's foot who is off screen. All you see is her leg and her foot. And he's like talking to her foot being like, oh, the arches are like the arches of architecture. But it's this prolonged, just like, you hear her laughing, but it's just her foot on the screen.
Absurd, and I love it. And it is like Quentin Tarantino level.
It is
gonna
very
say.
Tarantino. Yes.
A woman's beautiful foot, but I love that scene so much. I think it's so funnily framed.
Yes, I agree. Like for humorous aspects, and then obviously him being very drunk, like it all worked. But I was kind of like, all right, Tarantino, calm down. And then when he meets, Helen Hayes as Catherine for the first time after they're having to hide from some aerial bombing or whatever, and he assumes that it's the same woman from earlier, and so he like grabs her foot and starts doing it again, and again we get a very close shot of a foot. So again, I'm like, funny, but also calm down, Tarantino. Like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Well, I will say, jumping off of like what Abby was saying, that was the first thing I noticed was a lot of the point of view shots in this movie. Like it would switch in between a point of view to like third person. And I've never read anything by Ernest Hemingway. I only recognize the name because of that one scene in the Silver Linings Playbook where Bradley Cooper's character finishes the book and he gets mad because of the needless death or whatever. I was like, oh, is this that one where he would like flipped out about? But I was just like a side note. The one thing though that I'll say besides just like the point of view shots was from my understanding, I think it was like half autobiographical. Yes. So when Gary Cooper meets Helen Hayes' character, it's very weird. Like, it's not very romantic. Like, he's very pushy. And I think does he rape her? Because
Pretty
she's
much.
like saying no, no, no. And then he still goes through with it.
Yeah. There's also, okay, so I'm glad you brought that up because there's several, in a couple of movies that we've watched this year, there has been like the woman protesting sort of thing. And then just continuing on. And I don't know, it could be modern viewers sort of thing, because I know it used to be like, no, women have to protest, even with that sort of explanation of like, that was part of the role that a woman had to play, is to like pretend to not be into it. Otherwise she seems too willing or whatever. I feel like even that I'm not comfortable with, even in that time, you know, like, I just feel like, is that just something that people said at the time to put more power into the hands of men? Like, I don't know. It was
weird. It was like a very uncomfortable scene. Like, I was like, what the fuck? And then especially when I started reading more about, like, some of it was like fact, others was just like for the sake of writing. And so I was like, is he supposed to be Gary Cooper? Like, was he like this with the woman?
So I can elaborate a little bit as someone who has read Hemingway, because literature major, you know, it's what you gotta do. But when Hemingway was very young, you know, he was like the ambulance, like corps driver. He signed up for the war, and he had a leg injury while he was there. I think he was in Italy at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But he ended up falling in love with the nurse who took care of him. Her name was Agnes von Kurowski, and she was 7 years older than him. They had this nice romance, and once he recovered, returned to the United States, and they had agreed that essentially she would join him within a few months and they would get married. And so this was like his first big love. He was like a teenager at the time, completely smitten. And instead, like, he received a letter from her a few months later with the news that she was engaged to an Italian officer. And so that like broke Hemingway. And according to like biographers, that rejection of him early on just like traumatized him. And in future relationships, we know he followed a pattern of abandoning his wives before they abandoned him, sort of thing. Again, just something he clearly didn't work through. But knowing that this romance plays out very similarly to the way that his romance played out with Agnes, with the romance falling in love with the nurse and stuff, it's just, I can't help but to think that while he was writing it, he was like, okay, but how does it end? Okay, she loves him, and she loves him so much, and she waits for him, and then they're gonna have a baby, but then she dies.
My man writing fan fiction for his own real life relationships.
Yeah.
literally.
And I haven't read the book in a really long time, but isn't the book like, it's kind of a downer. Like, it's very, very, has that kind of like cynical, like, you know, and it has
which Hemingway's famous for.
Yeah, Hemingway's famously cynical, right? But like this, I don't think is that at all. It is like pure romanticism,
right?
In terms of how it is staged and how it is blocked and shot, and even the ending sequence. He's lifting up Kat's dead body, and it's like her hospital sheet is basically a bridal gown, and those the end of the war bells are basically their wedding bells, right? Where it is pure unadulterated, like melodrama and romanticism in a way that the novel really is not.
Yes. And Hemingway famously hated this adaptation of the movie.
Unsurprised.
For those reasons, because he was like, this is overly romanticized. But he ended up being very good friends with Gary Cooper anyway, and later cast him in For Whom the Bell Tolls, specifically because of that. Yeah, but they had agreed to never discuss this movie because it was just like, I hated that movie.
I did pick up on that though. Like, when I was watching this movie, it felt like a 1950s romance movie, how it's very just over the top. But that's the word that you used, Abby, melodrama. It's exactly that. Because I was like, this just feels different from the other movies that we've watched from like the 30s or 20s, you know, where it's like, yes, there's romance, but this just feels like more oomph to it. And like, even the sets, you can see that there was a lot more like, I guess, set design, and then they had like a projector in the back, so if they were like driving or if he was walking through the woods, they would have a projector projecting, like, I don't know, a battlefield or something in the background, which I don't think we saw at from other movies, or maybe I just didn't recognize it. But I feel like that's a common thing that we've seen with all the movies that we watched for this year's Oscars. But yeah, I definitely did feel like a 1950s romance.
I feel like too, maybe part of the thing that is contributing to that is, so you've got all this like lavish set design, right? But there's like a tenor to the scripting that is a lot more modern and contemporary style dialogue than maybe we are seeing in other movies and have seen in other movies. So it's that really interesting balance of these beautiful lush sets and then this kind of contemporary grounded dialogue kind of marrying to make it feel very modern.
Yeah.
This is one movie that I was able to find a few contemporary reviews for. They tend to be pretty lengthy and just talk about the, I guess, quality of the film overall. But I found one from Mordaunt Hall and then another one from Irene Thierer, who became a film critic around this time. And so hopefully we'll see more from her. But their two opinions are pretty different. So I'm going to read Mordaunt Hall's first, or at least excerpts from it. There is too much sentiment and not enough strength in the pictorial conception of Ernest Hemingway's novel. Possibly, if one has not read Mr. Hemingway's book, the picture will appeal as a rather interesting, if tragic, romance. So kind of our first, like, the book was better review. And then Irene Thierer, on the other hand, said, the picture is heartrending and throat-hurting. It moves you so deeply that it is often difficult to see the screen for the haze which mists your tear-filled eyes. I'm like, yeah. I feel like Irene is in line with the director of this movie, and Mordaunt Hall is in line with Ernest Hemingway.
So interesting.
Two very different thoughts on how this movie should go.
I'm more side on Mordaunt's side and Ernst's side, because as soon as you said the word Abbey melodrama, I was like, that was what was kind of going through my mind the whole time. Because for listeners' benefit, the main thrust of the story is a male ambulance driver and a nurse in World War I become star-crossed lovers in the midst of the chaos of the war. And for me, it was like, I don't know, it's like not necessarily believable to me that they would be so focused in the way that they were on their romance with all of this going on around them. And it was kind of like obnoxious to me in a way. But I will say, Sarah, once you explained the background and Ernst's actual experience, it actually raised my estimation of the movie, because I am just looking at it as like the ultimate male fantasy, in the sense that this is like the ultimate example of cope. And I can imagine why Ernst was frustrated that it was like probably in his mind, it was like he came out looking cooler, whereas Gary Cooper's more tender. It's very tragic when she dies. I don't know. I think he was working through a lot, and
he was, and I don't think he ever fully worked through it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I did at least want to mention that apparently this movie for American theaters, they did have the option of two different endings. Like theaters got to choose which one they wanted to air to the public. So there is a happy ending version of this movie where Catherine survives.
That's crazy.
Yes, which is like defeating the whole purpose.
That's insane.
Yeah, exactly. So most major cities, like obviously Hemingway was becoming a much more important figure in the literature scene and stuff. So most major cities showed the ending as it was meant to be, which is the sad ending. But I feel like, Depression era small towns were probably like, let's give them a happy ending,
That's hilarious.
All right. Anything else that we want to say about A Farewell to Arms? All right. I'm going to move on to our next movie then, which is I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which follows James Allen, a returning World War I veteran determined to become his own man now that he's finished with the army. Instead, he falls on hard times and is entrapped into committing a crime. This lands him on, you guessed it, a chain gang, which he, you guessed it, subsequently escapes. While the main beats of the plot may not come as a shock, the meat of the movie, which asks us to define imprisonment and interrogate the relentless cruelty of a society that would legitimize it, are surprising and stark.
So I just want to come out and say I really like this movie, and it has a lot.
I really like this movie too.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for it, but the one I want to mention right off the bat is Paul Muni's performance, because he is just so naturalistic, and it's like a cut above most of the things we've seen so far, with maybe a couple of exceptions. But I just wanted to hit on that right away, that really made the movie feel modern in a way that most of the movies we've watched so far don't. And then secondarily, I've mentioned before, I love movies that are there to make a point and be honest about it. And when they can hit you over the head with their point, but if they do it well and it's effective, and my God, that ending as the lights are going down, what happens is he falls in love with a woman, gets out of the chain gang, which for people that don't know is just prisoners would break rocks essentially for hours on end every day to fill their time, mostly in the American South. And mostly this was African American people that had to do it. But the main character here is white. But anyway, he escapes the chain gang midway through the movie, makes a great new life for himself in the North, and then gets caught later by this woman who screws him over. So he ends up back in the chain gang. And then he ultimately escapes again in a very dramatic kind of climactic scene. But at the end of the movie, he comes across this woman that he had loved a couple years later. And she's like, stop, don't go. Let's be together. And then he's like, I can't, I'm wanted. And he's kind of drifting away. And she says, what do you do? How will you survive? And he says, I steal. And then he just drifts away into the shadows. And it's so powerful because what this movie is saying is, and it was so good that we watched this right after M, which really tempts us with that idea of retributive justice, capital punishment, taking a life to make things right. Well, a chain gang is kind of cut from the same ideological cloth. Punish someone into doing the correct behavior. And here we go. They just punish the hell out of him. And instead of it rehabilitating him in the authorities' minds, it destroyed what was otherwise a really good human being. So it was powerful. Really powerful movie.
Yeah, that ending definitely stuck with me for a few days. And I was really excited to see Paul Muni in more things. He was the lead, like the original Scarface the year before, and totally agree that he has this blend of naturalistic but very intense acting style that just really draws you in. I think we will see him in future movies. Like I think he is in other nominated movies, but yeah, phenomenal acting. And this movie, well, technically it was based on a memoir of someone who this is essentially exactly what they had gone through, with the exception of he actually did steal initially in order to eat, but World War I veteran, ended up in the chain gang, escaped those 2 times and was on the run still while this movie was made. And so he was very nervous, but did help with some of the movie like writing and direction. And I know Paul Muni met with him a few times to try and like understand his mannerisms and trying to understand his life. And it did all culminate in helping abolish the chain gang system, which like that's pretty huge. Like Jake is saying, it's always nice when movies have sort of like a social point, and it's especially nice, I think, when it helps move discussion of those things forward. Because I think most citizens, right, at this time wouldn't have really ever thought twice about chain gangs or known what was going on or known what people were going through in those types of systems, if not for this. So it's often put at the same level as things like the jungle for, meat packing, et cetera, immigrant experience. Yeah, exactly.
Like I said, I agree with everything like that you and Jake said. I really loved this movie, and I didn't know anything going into it. So I didn't know Paul Muni or, anything about him, or I just went in blind. But I think after watching the movie, it made me want to research him a little bit more, just because I feel like, aside from his acting and the points you guys made, I just feel like he just has a very commanding presence, even in the beginning when he's just out of the war, and he's kind of like, I wouldn't say naive, but he has a lot of hope still, a lot of ambition for what he wants to do, because he tells his mom and his brother he doesn't want to work at the factory job that his brother has lined up for him because he wants to escape routine. But something that I noticed throughout the film was that it opens up with him saying that, and has to like why he wants to become an engineer and all this other stuff. But it's just ironic too, as the movie progresses, that he's always trying to escape something. So he leaves to become an engineer, but he ends up becoming impoverished. So he's trying to escape poverty, and then he ends up in a chain gang from stealing, not because he did it, but he just got roped into some other man who thought was being kind to him. But again, he's in a very strict environment, routine with the chain gang. He ends up leaving. He finds this relationship with this woman after he's becoming an engineer and getting what he wants and all that. But that relationship with the woman who gives him room and board ends up kind of being a emotional chain gang for him. Yeah. So he ends up trying to escape that by falling in love with some other woman and asking for his wife for a divorce, but then that backfires on him, and because she feels slighted, she outs his secret, and he ends up going back into the chain gang, and he, you know, stays there until he decides to escape again. And then when he's out in the world as a fugitive, once again he's stuck in this routine he doesn't want to be in because he has to steal to survive. So I thought that was a very interesting theme throughout, I guess, this character's life, was that like, he wanted to escape routine from coming out of the war. He wanted something bigger for himself. But because of, I don't really, I guess it was like his own actions in a way, but also the actions of others, like out of his control, where he just ended up being stuck under somebody's thumb or even in the system's thumb. And so I thought that was a very interesting, I don't know, little nugget that floated around the movie. But aside from just being like a commanding presence, I don't know, he was like, from what I read, his type of acting style was kind of what a lot of people would consider now as method acting, where he really tries to get into the mind or the headspace of the character he's going to portray, which makes sense because when you watch the movie, I don't know, it's just like your eyes are just always on him all the time. And I feel like the way he moves and the way he interacts just with the set or the other people, it's just like there's a lot of unspoken, like a lot of body language that also portrays more to his character as opposed to what we see when other actors in movies during this time. They're trying to sell a character.
Exactly.
But I feel like he's just embodying the character.
He's in the moment and he's not overthinking things. Like we said from the beginning, it's naturalistic, and it doesn't hurt that he looks just like Luigi Mangione if you just added a little bit of tasteful amount of fuzz between the eyebrow.
I will say, I think that there's also a lot of quiet, subtle support for that happening in the script. Like, for example, at the very beginning of the movie, when he's in the factory, like a loud noise happens and he flinches from it.
Yeah.
Which is clearly supposed to be a callback to the character's time in the war.
Right.
And then you also see things like how, like, being on the chain gang and literally chained to one another or having a chain between your legs, like, changes the gait of the men
the
walking around. Like, even when they've been unchained, it really, like, weighs on their bodies physically. And then that end, when you have a car backfire, you have that same flinch from him. So it's this interesting combination of like a script that is very interested in, you know, for lack of a better word, moralizing this issue, but also has these very like kind of subtle like opportunities for him to make these kind of more grounded acting choices.
Yeah. I'm also really curious, kind of like a chicken and egg situation, because I know when meeting with Robert Burns, he himself, like anytime a car backfired or if while filming there was like loud banging of construction and stuff, he was very jumpy and just very, like he lived in fear through all of that, right? So I wonder how much of that was already baked into the script versus through working with him and meeting him and just observing him, you know, the writers being like, oh, okay, like we need to show how much this affects people because it clearly does. Like we're seeing the effect of it. So that is definitely a very, very good call out. I think one other thing that we haven't fully touched on, which was to me just very, very impressive, was the car chase scene that they had. Like that, it was so dynamic and so intense. I think it's probably the most like stressful car chase that we've seen on film, and it rivals a lot of ones today.
Yeah, also explosions.
So, explosions. You know. Yeah, definitely.
Do we have anything else to say about I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang?
Nah, just it was a good movie.
Yeah, it was good. I think this one is my, like, you know, we haven't watched Cavalcade yet, but this is my, if you're going to watch anything, watch this one movie.
Yeah, that's kind of where I
don't know if I would say that.
We might be getting to another one.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to move on to Lady for a Day. This is the podcast's first Frank Capra movie, famous for finding real feelings inside completely saccharine setups. This early Capra outing features a community uniting behind a destitute woman to help pass her off as a wealthy society lady to her visiting daughter and potential in-laws. features a spectacular performance by Mae Robson as the titular lady for a day in the first 30 minutes, after which Capra seems to forget about his main character entirely in favor of the colorful cast of criminals behind her ruse.
Probably the first movie that we've watched so far that made me genuinely laugh multiple times throughout. Just, they had great side characters. Thought it was very funny. It had like a good blend to me of kind of a wholesome family film with some drama. I think personally, it deserved to win Best Adaptation because this was adapted, I think, from a short story and it was nominated, but it lost to Little Women, and I'll have stronger feelings about that later, but just wanted to say how much I enjoyed this movie.
This movie was so heartwarming, and now I understand why Frank Capra has kind of the credentials that he does, because I had always known him from doing It's a Wonderful Life on stage, and if people know that movie, it's like very heartwarming, life-affirming, you know, and this was the same vibe with this one, because you have this very downtrodden woman, Apple Annie, who's such a great stage presence, and you see her, she's kind of a quirky character in the beginning. There's this gambler who always buys an apple from her for good luck, and he ends up being the one who facilitates this ruse so that Apple Annie can impress her daughter from across the Atlantic. And whereas she is the fixture in the beginning, like Abby said, and then she kind of falls off and you're introduced to this great ensemble of other characters, to me it all works because it's about a time when society is struggling so much. You see people from all walks of life coming together, setting aside their normal routine, almost like they did in M, for those that saw that bonus episode. Everybody's set aside their normal behavior and said, we have an opportunity. Reminds me of when that kid had a terrible illness and the entire city of San Francisco pretended that they were in a Batman episode and he dressed up like Batman. It was like that, except for a very kooky but kind homeless woman who just so happened to have a daughter who was for some reason from high society.
She has a home, Jake. She's just very poor. Remember?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. She's not homeless.
I feel like the implication is that her daughter went overseas, maybe potentially for like school or something like that. And kind of in the intervening years, her mom has fallen on hard times and become like a alcoholic, and kind of as a way to cover for that, she has been telling her daughter that she is a woman of high society and basically like, don't worry about me. But it all, you know, starts to come back to her when her daughter's like, I'm coming home with my fiance and his fabulously wealthy Count father.
Yes, which, okay, so I just have to mention one of the times that made me laugh, surprisingly, was obviously it's like this blend of a like dramatic, frantic moment where she's going to the hotel where she's been receiving letters, but the guy that was kind of helping her out with that has been fired. So she has to talk to an employee that does not know who she is to try and get this letter. And so she goes in just looking very frazzled. Picture a quintessential witch. She kind of looks like that. She runs up to the front desk and is like, please, I need to know if there's a letter from whatever the name is. And the person working, the attendant at the front desk, looks up from what he's doing, just very calm, and it's just like, oh my goodness, like when he sees her. And it was just such a funny moment of just like that actor's reaction to her. But then obviously the rest of the scene is good and dramatic, but there's just like those little moments of, you know, humor and surprise, I feel like, woven into that. And as far as her background, I think this is also a nice like pre-code thing to mention, because when she's discussing like her whole situation to Dave the dude, you know, the main kind of criminal guy, I think she says that she had sent the baby off when she was like shortly after giving birth. Yeah, because she admits that like she was never married, and so she hoped for a better life for the daughter, and she's been sending whatever kind of like meager funds to, I'm assuming, the family or whoever that had raised the daughter on her behalf. So that's kind of the background there. After Hays Code kicks in, like, I don't think she would have even been able to admit that this was like an unwed pregnancy, you know?
Annie's love for her daughter is so pure, and so the fixture of her life. Just like Sarah says, she spends all the little resources she has sending it over to her, but she feels so ashamed of her station in life. And it's just beautiful the way everybody sees that love and does their best to help her keep up that facade, unfortunately. But I think their love kind of transcends in the end. I think a good question to maybe ask is how it would have unfolded if the truth had come out about Annie's actual life situation once it got deep enough. Part of me likes to think it wouldn't have mattered. It probably would have, considering her daughter's fiance's background. But I think by the end of it, you're just so overwhelmed by the kindness of everyone involved that it doesn't really matter.
That aspect of it did genuinely surprise me, because I think we're so used to in movies in Hollywood where the truth would come out, but it would then be this wholesome, like, oh, it doesn't matter. So that's almost what I was expecting, kind of like the predecessor to all of that. But the fact that they were able to keep up the ruse in the end, when the daughter was leaving back, to Spain, I was like, did she never learn the truth? They just managed to just keep it under wraps. And the bittersweet assumption is like, they probably won't ever really see each other again, but they have this beautiful moment, and Annie was able to maintain her dignity and keep her daughter happy and know that her daughter's going to be happy. And that's what you walk away with. But I was just like, what? The truth didn't come out. This is new. This is interesting.
This is that old timey dedication to keeping up appearances that to us feels inauthentic and like there's not full closure. But I think for Annie, it was all she was looking for, because now at this point, she can pass away or disappear into obscurity, but in her mind, she will always be this fixture of love and support to her daughter, which is all that ever really meant to her life.
I know that you said it's not necessarily something that we do as a modern audience, but I don't know. When I have people come over to my house, I spend 10 hours cleaning my house before they come over. And then after, when they leave, it takes me a couple days to put anything into the dishwasher. So I actually think this is very relevant to modern life.
Okay, modern movies, modern life. This is more true. Yeah.
First problem is inviting people to your house. That's it.
Yeah, this is fair.
No, I did want to point out there are some really excellent side performances and side characters, really good character actors. I would say we're seeing the early development of real character actors here. One actor named Guy Kibbe, who plays Judge Henry, who is the faux husband. He's a con artist, expert billiards player,
pool
hustler with really great manner of speech and a phrase for every situation. And so he's obviously great to have in carrying out their ruse, and he's very able to effectively portray an American sort of nouveau rich aristocrat. The funny thing about his character is, as the Count, the father of the fiance, who everyone is intimidated by, gets to know him, you kind of see that he's kind of keeping up a ruse as well, because in old Europe, that's very much the concern of the aristocrat. So ultimately, their relationship culminates in Guy Kibbe scamming him in a pool game.
So good, so funny.
And it's just nice the way that all came together and the way it kind of saves the whole ruse in the moment. And then I just have to point out Ned Sparks, who played Happy, who was kind of Dave the Dude's right-hand man. I got to tell you, everything that guy said made me laugh. I loved his character.
Yeah, so Ned Sparks as Happy and then Nat Pendleton as Shakespeare.
Yes,
so
Shakespeare.
Both of those side characters, so funny. And then just, again, speaking to the humor of this film, like Ned Sparks as the character being named Happy just always had the most deadpan face, was always the most judgmental and negative about everything. And then the character whose name was Shakespeare was like the real dum-dum who wouldn't get a joke until like 10 seconds later and be like, I see, like that sort of thing, where it was just very, very amusing. And then just speaking of additional kind of side character things that stood out to me, I think this is the first movie that we've watched where there's like an overt reference to someone being gay, because when they do the whole makeover for Apple Annie, there's like the troupe of women makeup artists and stuff and costumers, and then there's one man with them. And so when he sees that guy going in there, it's like, oh, he can't go in there. And the woman coordinating is like, it's all right, Duke, it's all right, it's all right. And then Duke is kind of like, oh, Pierre, and that's kind of it. And I was just like, doubt we'll see anything like that post Hays Code, but it was just kind of interesting to see.
It's a tasteful way to do it, considering the circumstances and the context. I just love this movie. I can't recommend it enough. I would say this is one of like the two or three that to our modern audiences, I would say watch this and you'll see that movies from this era can be as entertaining as ones that we watch now.
Mm-hmm. I really liked it too, surprisingly. I actually gave this like a 4 out of 5 stars. I saved the
popcorns?
5. Yeah, I saved the 5 for like the really, really good ones. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot.
I like the first half of this movie a lot.
Just the first half?
Yeah, I really think that it is to the movie's detriment that we lose so much of Robson in the back half of it. I think it is a real shame that they don't keep her on the screen. I think that the cast of like criminal mob characters, they're all really fantastic, but I think the overall arc and like narrative strength of the movie is kind of weak once you remove Robson and her family, because that's the motivating drama of the movie, right? Is how do we, maybe not the motivating drama, but it is certainly the emotional heart of the movie of
Agree.
How do we preserve this ruse so that these characters can continue to be happy. And it gets kind of so sidetracked in like the hijinks of the ruse part where it starts to lose the emotional grounding of why it's important. And I think that the scenes are all really excellent, but I think that losing that is really to the detriment of the movie. It's not my favorite Capra movie, I guess, where it's like, I think his idealism is and his kind of obsession with the good of community and that sort of thing is really cool and interesting, particularly in this time period. And especially as we start to kind of get into more cynical movies as we get closer to World War II. But I think that the script on this one is just not as strong as I want it to be.
Yeah, I feel like more scenes with Mae Robson and the Count and like what's going on with their side of the ruse, right? Like keeping up appearances could have also just been similarly funny while maintaining that like emotional thread throughout the movie.
I think Capra was concerned about whether having a movie starring a 75-year-old woman would sell tickets.
Sure.
So I think that kind of anxiety, which understandable given the times in terms of like, this movie must make money. I think that it kind of loses faith in its main character, which I think is a shame because Robson's performance is incredible.
Well, I understand where you're coming from, but I feel that it is not a story that is about her. It, as you referenced there, it is more a tale of a community coming together and her experience is a vehicle for that. And I also feel like she gets plenty of meaty scenes. Yes, in the middle portion where they're preparing for the ruse itself, she kind of becomes a background fixture and we could have done with some more of her. But I think she does get her payoff in the end. But I thought it worked because I don't like movies that become just a vehicle for one performance. I think that it can be too much like that gets in the way of the bigger picture because I felt different things throughout this movie. And that has to do with the way it was constructed in a meta sense. And it wasn't just a vehicle for her. So that's my perspective. But I get what you're saying. And I definitely agree.
No,
she was underutilized.
I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do agree with Jake. I think in the beginning, she stood out a lot. I respect the movie because it was more about a story being told. And I didn't really feel like she faded into the background, to be honest, when watching the movie. I just feel like, I don't know, I felt like it was well done.
Yeah, I don't think I even thought about it, but I did know, I think I felt it. Like there was just some lull amongst the comedy where I'm like, I feel like this is missing a little bit of something. There was a scene between Mae Robson and the daughter, but I feel like if that scene were better, then it would have felt more balanced. But it
just something in the middle there to kind of like remind us of why we're doing this, right?
Yeah. Like if the daughter had been asking her questions that would be reasonable, I think is extremely related to the ruse that they're having to continue to pull off. But what's done is done.
I'm interested to see how, because we're going to see a lot of Frank Capra's movies, how this kind of like develops across his filmography.
I don't have much knowledge other than It's a Wonderful Life. So maybe 5 years from now, I'll be like, that crock of shit, Lady for a Day? That sucked.
No, I think it's got all the hallmarks of his movies. I just think it's kind of an interesting early point in his career. And I think he did this with a screenwriting partner that he works with and continues to work with. So it's kind of interesting to see that partnership develop. All right. Anything else to say about Lady for a Day?
Nope.
So our next movie is She Done Him Wrong, which is the film adaptation of Mae West's impressively horny and highly controversial Broadway play, Diamond Lil. The overly convoluted plot about unmasking a turn-of-the-century crime ring is less culturally significant than the picture it paints of Mae West as a spectacularly charismatic and confident force of nature, and Cary Grant as a young actor who has yet to figure out if he's heterosexual. I love this. I don't know that the movie, like the actual beat to beats, the story of the movie, I give a single shit about. However, watching this and then reading Mae West Wikipedia is like, mwah, beautiful.
Yeah. There's love everything about her.
Everything about her is spectacular. So this is the first movie that she made with Cary Grant, and it's very early in his career. She claims to have discovered him. And allegedly, the story about her getting him as her leading man for this movie was that she saw him across the production lot and was like, if he can talk, I'll take him. It's so funny.
Also, on top of that, he had been in 2 movies before with other well-known stars at the time. So when kind of challenged on this whole, you say you discovered him, but he was in these 2 other movies, she said those were basically just screen tests with starlets. I was like, oh my God, Mae, you wild.
It's absolutely something that I cringed when watching the movie because it is such a stereotypical role. She has a African American woman as her maid, and it's it's so heavily stereotyped. But I will say that it is a role that Mae West specifically had created because she wanted to share the screen with an African American woman. So it's one of those weird things of we look back at this and cringe because it is so deeply stereotypical and harmful. But at the same time, it's it was putting Black Americans in front of the camera. It was providing them with a job in this industry that was notoriously difficult for them to be in. And I think it is so cool that she was pushing for representation of African Americans on screen. She was really apparently fighting censorship. This movie is incredibly ribald, relentlessly horny. And she did a lot of the writing for herself as well. So it's this what an interesting figure in Hollywood.
Yeah, because she had written the stage play. And so in terms of really intentionally having African-American actors on screen with her, that was also true of her stage plays as well. And that was extremely controversial. And I think potentially it even resulted in her arrest a couple times. She very much seems like just a woman who consistently and intentionally pushed boundaries. And 6 months after this movie, the National Legion of Decency was formed. And they literally cited Mae West and this movie as one of the major reasons why it was necessary. They were like, you see what happens when we leave them to their own devices.
I did read that they couldn't use the title of the Broadway play, which is Diamond Lil, because the play was so controversial that they were like, you can't name it the same thing. People will not buy tickets to this.
Yeah, exactly. That is true. I think they had wanted to adapt it for 2 years. And then because of that, they were unable to. And then they knew that censorship was really, really starting to come down hard. So they're like, if we don't do it now, it's not going to happen. Let's change some to at least get it past there. And I think they filmed it in 3 weeks or something like that. They just really rushed it through, and it fully is just a vehicle for Mae West to be as Mae West as possible.
Yeah.
National Legion of Decency. I've never heard a more Orwellian phrase, I think, in my life. You can't just say it normally. You have to say the National Legion of Decency.
They saw Mae West flouncing around in her absurd lift riser shoes and were like, we can't have this.
In her intense platform shoes, and she had to be sewn into her costumes for this movie. She was as tight as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Iconic. I love her.
So I said it midway through when we were watching it, I said, did Mae West single-handedly cause the implementation of the Hays Code? Because just like you guys are saying, she is a force of nature. And ironically enough, of all the great movies we watched this year, because I think there were a lot of very strong movies this year, this is the one that wormed its way into my brain, I would say, more so than others, to where for at least 48 hours, I was talking like Mae West. I was looking up Mae West online all the time. I read the Wikipedia page several times, and I watched a very informative YouTube video by this worshipful twink towards her. So I learned a lot about Mae West, but I think the thing is, like, within 20 minutes of her appearing on screen, and it seems to be not just me, I think most men and some women, it has this effect. I found myself like wanting to turn over power of attorney and complete financial domination of my life to her. Like, I love Mae West.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think this is the only movie we're going to see with her for this podcast, because this was the only Mae West film to receive an Academy Award nomination.
She flew too close to the sun.
Side series where we just watch Mae West movies.
Yeah. She's fascinating.
Do we have anything else to say about She Done Him Wrong, which is just the Mae West is amazing vehicle?
I took no other notes. Like, that's it.
You done me right.
I think for like an example of how like sharp and potentially controversial the writing is, there's a great scene between Mae West's character and Cary Grant's character. Essentially, she is like covered in diamonds at all times, and it's the implication being that she has gotten these diamonds from the various men that she's had relationships with. And Cary Grant says something to the tune of, "It's a shame that you value your diamonds more than your soul." And her immediate response is, "It's a shame that you value my soul more than my diamonds." And it's just so good.
I got the vibe that she wrote like a stand-up set's worth of material and jokes, and they just constructed a movie around that. And I have absolutely no problem with that.
What it feels like.
Yeah, I don't really care about the story. It's just a vehicle to see her batting these men around like little toys.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Our next movie is Little Women. This is the first talkie adaptation of what will become many, many adaptations of Louis Alcott's novel. A coming-of-age story about 4 young women living in Civil War-era Massachusetts. This adaptation centers Jo March, played by a young and outrageously vibrant Katharine Hepburn. Her performance is spectacular, but fans of the book may be disappointed by how little, the other women are given to do.
Oh, that was good, Abby.
Thank you.
I can't start talking about this one. I'm the wrong gender. Somebody else jump on this grenade.
Okay, look, I'm going to be honest. I truly don't know what it is about Little Women that just kind of bores me. Mm-hmm. To me, there's like the theming of it. Young girls entering adulthood where they're leaving that innocence behind. They're learning through their various paths what it means to exist and navigate in this world. And it's cool that they have their own personalities, but it's very much like Meg is this way, Beth is this way, Jo is this way. And like, I can't get into it. I'm so sorry.
I think, and I don't have any particular attachments to the novel, but I think that my problem with this adaptation, and honestly all adaptations that I've seen, including the Greta Gerwig one, which I know is maybe like one of the more successful adaptations, is so many of them lose what is at the core of the novel, which is like this familial ensemble piece where it's like a real story about familial love and how you're coming of age with your sisters. And it's so much about the sister relationships. I mean, it's a lot of characters to put on screen for an hour and a half or 2 hours or however long the movie is. So how a lot of adaptations get around that is it's apparently pretty common in Little Women, like fan circles, to call adaptations the Jo show, because every movie just becomes about Jo March, who is like the tomboy who has like ambitions to be an author, whereas the sickly one just shows up so that she can get sick and die. One of the sisters who is annoying just shows up to be annoying and then become like a little lady, and the oldest sister is just there to get married and have babies. So you really kind of like lose, I feel like, the texture of what is actually important about that novel. I think it is just such a hard thing to adapt. And kind of like once you lose that, it starts to come apart at the seams, because you don't necessarily see or understand like why these characters are doing the things that are doing and how their relationships work. And even things like Laurie, who is the son of the wealthy neighbor who initially like falls in love and tries to get into a relationship with Jo, who she refuses him. And then eventually marries one of the younger sisters. Oh gosh, I'm now blanking on her name, which I should
Amy.
know. Yeah, Amy. So he eventually marries Amy. And like the subtext of that, like when you understand that it's about this family story, it's that like for him, the important thing there was to be a part of their family. And it's not necessarily about like the person who he's marrying. It was just like he loved that family so much. And when you don't have the family on screen at all, and it's so much about like Joe's drama, is you kind of start to take away from like what is valuable about the story. However, Katharine Hepburn, great.
Yeah.
She was so good. She was very good. Yeah.
She was one of the best female performances we've seen so far.
Yeah.
But kind of building off what you're saying helps me to understand maybe why it didn't land as much for me, because it feels like there's components missing. Because as I was watching it, I just kept thinking like the phrase first world problems kept going through my brain. Because to me, Joe was pretty consistently supported by everyone around her in terms of her interest in writing and being fairly independent for the time and whatnot. I don't know. I guess the resolution is that she feels some level of self-actualization and fulfillment, but I didn't really get it. I mean, it was like she wanted to hear this random German guy tell her her writing was actually bad, and then that made her feel better. I don't really understand. And it might have been because before the movie started, Sarah was like, just so you know, this isn't my favorite movie. And so it was like that was in my brain. So maybe I missed out on some things.
I ruined this. I ruined this movie.
But
Sarah. No,
so
I think
sorry.
I think it does.
Think it still
loses
stands.
The familial elements. Yeah.
Coming from a different perspective, 'cause I don't know anything about these movies. When I saw that Little Women was on here, I actually rolled my eyes. I was like, because I know like the only thing I know is like it was a period piece, and I don't know. I just sometimes just don't like them. I will say though, the first half of this movie I did like. I don't know anything about Little Women. Every time people would talk about it or when they remade it, I didn't go watch it because I was like, whatever. But I agree with the fact of like saying like how Sarah said, like every character kind of just fits into this box really neatly. And I was like, it was just kind of weird. But I will say, at least for the first half, I did get that familial tie. I think that's why like in the beginning when I was watching it, I actually was very enthralled with the story because I was like, okay, let me, kind of take off my judgmental goggles and really try to sit down and watch it and see what other like everyone else speaks so highly about this movie. And I really tried to watch it like objectively. And so in the beginning, like I said, I enjoyed the dynamic between the sisters. And I think it's also because I grew up with sisters. I have two other sisters and then one really young one. And well, my two sisters, I'm the middle child, we're all pretty close in age. So like I could relate to that, where I'm not going to say we fit into a box because there's definitely stuff where we kind of mix in here and there. And like there is some differences where like when we were younger, we each, I think, kind of took on a role a little bit more where I was a little bit more outspoken and rebellious and rambunctious, and my older sister was a little bit more quieter and subdued. My little sister was more of a diva, and then obviously you get older and you start developing more of your personality, and so you have mesh.
But you're playing roles in the family, really.
Yes. The only thing though, like with the movie, is like I feel like once it hit the point when what's her face gets sick, that was like the big turning point where it just kind of switched. Like it turned into like this love story where I'm just kind of like my interest just died immediately.
Yeah,
like,
I agree with you.
I did feel like when Laurie came into the picture, I did feel like that familial thing where he was like very accepted by the family because he was lonely. He was alone, and he would always kind of like just watch through the window and be like, oh, happy family. I wish I had that. His grandpa or uncle was creepy though in this movie. I don't know how he is in other adaptations of the movie.
But he was like, Beth, take this piano.
Yes. I was like, are they going to turn this into sheep? Like Beth goes with the old man or something. But, yeah, I did feel like that disconnect from how the movie started with like, family and everyone is like caring about each other, to it just becoming like a disjointed thing. Like how Jake said, like there was a lot of things I didn't understand why they were happening. Like, okay, why did this younger artsy sister go live with Aunt Mae or whatever? Where were the parents now that they were older? Like the dad came back from the war and they just fucking forgot about him and threw him over to the side. The same thing with the mom. Like she wasn't even important anymore. And then Meg, I guess, I feel like they didn't even develop her character. She was just like a seamstress and then had babies.
Yeah, she was just there to get like married first, basically.
Mm-hmm. And then
I don't even know who that is.
The oldest sister.
But I do agree. Like, I feel like, especially with the second half of the movie, it definitely became more about Joe. And then I was like, well, why? Like, why is she the main character?
Yeah. I think no one has figured out how to adapt this book in a way that really does the sister dynamics justice. Like this one, I do agree with you, Chrysantha. Like in the beginning, it gets close and is doing some really interesting things with the siblings, but it kind of feels like it forgets that. And even in the book, when they all start to go their separate ways, that's the fact that they're separate is kind of like the important motivating driving force of that, of like, what does this mean when you kind of step away from your siblings and have to make your own life? Whereas here it doesn't feel like that's not really there, like that context. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a tough book to adapt. And I don't know that I've ever seen a version of this where I enjoy the movie.
Yeah. Your description of it made me want to read it because I think I've always just thought of this as, I guess, as the criticism, right? As the Joe show with her siblings that are just kind of whatever, cardboard cutouts. But if it really is like more meaningful relationships between them, then like I'm interested in that. I will say for this movie though, for all of my negativity, it was very pretty and the costumes were very impressive. Sure. And I know that the budget for this movie was gigantic at the time. So to your point, Abby, just being like, some of these movies had insane budgets and others were like strung along with pennies.
Made in 3 weeks, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. Made in 3 weeks versus this one was a year-long production schedule and like thousands of people worked on it. And one thing that I thought was cute, the kind of period piece dresses and stuff all looked great. But one thing that I didn't notice until I'd like read this little bit of trivia is that the costume designer, Walter Plunkett, he designed all of them so that they could shuffle through the actresses just to kind of bring some of that sisterhood in where they're like trading dresses or sometimes like sharing clothes and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I did not notice that.
Yeah, but that's charming.
There. Yeah.
Imagine if they had given Mae West that budget.
Oh, man.
I just kept thinking if Mae had walked into that room with all those pattering women talking, like when they would bring, oh, you made a cake. Oh, you got perfume. Oh. And Mae West just come in and just be like, listen here.
Jake is now just adding like not even self-insert fan fiction, but Mae West insert fan fiction into everything that we watch. Okay, but how would Mae West be in this
extended universe?
All right. Do we have anything else to say about Little Women?
No, I'm just laughing that last year and the year before, Jackie Cooper was Jake's hero, and now it's
Mae West.
All right. Smilin Through brings back podcast fave Norma Shearer to play both the roles of a murdered bride-to-be and the woman's niece who eventually falls in love with the son of the murderer, much to the outrage of her adopted father, who lost his fiancée all those years ago. While the melodrama may be less than the sum of its parts, the chemistry of the leads and the occasional surprisingly delicate narrative touch lends this romance between two star-crossed lovers a certain undeniable charm. This is not my favorite Norma Shearer role, but I love her like as an actor. I think that I just love to see her.
Yes, I feel exactly the same way where I'm just like, I'm happy to see her and I love her acting, even though in this movie, like her character was kind of wild. Like she got a little crazy in some scenes.
It feels, I don't know that I can say this really because I don't know much about direction. I feel like the direction is not great for her. Like I notice a lot more of her like weird little like arm ticks and that kind of stuff of like that stuff where it's very kind of stagey that I didn't necessarily notice in other movies where we've seen her. Yeah. I just don't think the direction is as great as it could be, but I do really love her. And I think that Frederick March, who is playing her romantic interest, he's really excellent as well, particularly in the back half of the movie. I think he does a lot of really interesting things. Yeah,
when he comes back from the war. Yeah,
making some really like more subtle acting performance choices. And I think that the combination of their performances is really interesting, where she kind of gets to be big and huge and kind of gives him a lot to work off of, to be kind of the opposite of that and provide like a more subtle contrast, which I just think they're really great. I don't know that I love this movie. As a person who loves a ghost story, it feels damning that anytime a ghost scene happened, I was like, get this ghost shit out of this movie. It's so overwrought.
I felt the same way, honestly. When I saw that Norma Shearer was in here, I was like, oh, great, you know? But I was severely disappointed and I was fucking bored. But I think that's just because, like I have, like I said before, low tolerance for like romance. I don't know, like I enjoyed the sequences with the flashback, I guess, because it explained why or how this woman died. But other than that, I was just kind of like waiting for the movie to end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the pacing's kind of brutal.
Yeah, pacing's brutal. I think the flashback sequences where you find out stuff were good. I also think just because of the acting, when he comes back from war and stuff and we get more of those like dramatic, tense sequences between them, were also engaging. I don't know if I would say that they were like really great or anything, but at least showed, I don't know, more interesting sorts of things about the character. And Abby, to your point, her being able to kind of be more like wild and dramatic in those scenes versus his very like stoic trying to hold it together had interesting contrast. But yeah, it was pretty boring.
I will say, like, there's 2 moments that I love in this movie. Well, I guess 3 moments, but there's a very tiny audio moment where when they are first in like his little breakfast nook, like in their first 48 hours of their relationship or first week or whatever, where I believe it's planes flying over, makes the windows rattle. And it's kind of like reality rattling in on this little moment that they're having. And then you have the same thing repeated later where that window rattles the evening before he's getting deployed. Like they've created this bubble for this relationship to be in that they're really struggling for the outside world not to come in and intrude on it. And those 2 moments really speak to the outside world trying to like get into this happy place that they've built. And yeah, I really wish the rest of the movie followed that same ethos, but instead we get like double exposure ghosts.
Exactly, like, yeah, the after image double exposure ghost being like, don't be an asshole, let her love. You know, it's like, okay. There were, so as we watch these movies, I feel like it's easier to pick up on new cinematography techniques and stuff because we just don't see a ton of them. But I think this was the first actual zoom in that we've seen. So it wasn't like an intercut closer shot. It looked like an actual zoom into her face when they're meeting at the house, like spooky haunted house for the first time.
When she's standing next to her original boyfriend who's a square.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. She's like, oh, get this guy out of the frame, you know? And then the other thing, so I don't know, was it a mini? I didn't rewind to like go back or do any research, but when they have to go seek shelter in the first place, there's like lightning hits a tree and it splits in half. Was that a mini? Like, how did they film this? How did they?
I don't know.
Does anyone know? I was just like, what? What was that? But then the movie just hadn't captured my interest enough to really dig deep into it. So I was like, I'll just mention it on the pod and see if anyone else knows.
I think it probably was a mini because I know, like, I forgot to mention this, but in, I think it was Farewell to Arms where they had miniatures. You could tell it was like a set that was made or a miniature, like when the bells were tolling and stuff. So it probably was a miniature.
That's what I would think. Yeah. That was just kind of caught my interest. And then the second thing, when the opening credits were rolling and like everyone's names were popping up, I noticed that there was a line for gowns, like not even costume design. It was just gowns by Adrian. Like for just one name,
Adrian.
one seller. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm super interested in this. So somehow I didn't look into the tree, but I did look into gowns by Adrian because Norma's dresses in this movie were genuinely so beautiful. And there were some that had like designs that I feel like we haven't seen really. There were like cold shoulder cutouts and stuff where it's just like, oh, he's doing like really interesting stuff. Come to find out that costume designer like worked on a ton of things. He's the one who did the costume design for Wizard of Oz. So like decided on the ruby slippers, all of that. So he was just very, very integral to this time in Hollywood. And he was married to Janet Gaynor, apparently, but it's considered one of the kind of earliest lavender marriages that we know of because he was openly gay and Janet Gaynor is thought thought to have been at least bisexual, apparently. So this was just like a partnership between the two of them. And they stayed together. They seemed happy for a long time. But that was just really interesting. But I'm going to keep an eye out for more of his like credits, because more of Adrian, because genuinely I was like, these are beautiful. Hello.
Yeah, they're great.
Meanwhile, the men just look like totally normal. That was the other thing.
Just
where it's
some
like
guys.
Just some guys in suits. Here's some, 3-piece suits, but the dress is fabulous.
I just keep thinking about essentially what happens after this movie of like, so you're a adopted child of a man who has refused to let you get together with your boyfriend because your boyfriend's dad murdered his wife to be. And he finally comes around and decides that you can go be in a relationship with him. And he blesses you and you run off to go catch this man at the station. And when you come home, you find that your adopted father is dead.
That was my thought too.
I feel like, I feel like maybe if it were me, that one might color the like tenor at the beginning of my relationship of like, I killed my dad by insisting.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely had that same thought too. Like, I get that they were wanting to do like a cute Titanic moment where they reunited again, like in their young versions and stuff. But I was like, this is not the time to do it. Like, your adopted daughter's coming home happy that the family's all going to be together and you guys can grow to love and accept each other. And you just decided to die instead. You're like, all right, you can have the house because I'm not going to fucking be in it. And like, that's it.
Completely unrelated, but I like the one thing, even though this movie was kind of like a snooze fest for me, was in the beginning with that little girl and she shows him her underwear. It was so weird how she's like, and I have my good panties on, and she lifts her dress.
It's just such a kid thing.
What? I don't know. Maybe it's like modern viewer, but I was like, what the fuck? Like, why was
it's like, okay, your parents need to have told you to not to do that. But yeah, I think it is just showing like, here's just a weird little kid, still innocent, doesn't know her family died. But we could probably ask why, because apparently I looked it up and that actress of that little child, she's still alive. Yeah. I was like, Cora C. Collins. She's like 97.
She was in 47 movies as a child.
Wow.
She was a cute kid.
She was a very cute kid. Yeah.
She was very cute. But now, again, just like knowing what Jackie Cooper went through, I'm like, Cora, are you okay?
So, as with East Lynne, I'm quite relieved that I watched this one alone. And I think it has to do with the fact that I looked at it in a very different way. And it's very interesting to hear all of your interpretations, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and what you're saying makes sense in many ways. But I will just play devil's advocate for a minute. And I won't say this is one of my favorite movies, but I would put it, for me, it is like solidly middle of the pack. And what resonated for me with this movie, I found the uncle's story to be very interesting. And if you know someone or felt in your own life that you've ever been destroyed for a prolonged period, or even just temporarily by grief or loss or whatever in a self-destructive way, and the process of working through that, through opening your heart up to new opportunities for relationships, can be a very kind of redeeming and cathartic experience over time. And the reason the movie really worked for me is because for the 90% of the movie, I was on the uncle's side. And I thought that Norma was being a very ungrateful little rat, because he had one rule. He gave her a beautiful life. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have any blood relation to her. He let her do whatever she wanted and had a beautiful home. And he had one simple rule: don't fuck the son of the guy who ruined my life. But
fair.
She was so overcome by her love, whatever, she just had to have him. It wasn't like there were a million other guys in the English countryside. So I thought he put up with a whole lot, all things considered, especially after we go back in time and see how perfect and idyllic his life was looking and how that was ripped away so senselessly. And what you do when you're in that situation, you have that kind of loss, is one way to react to it is to retreat so far that you start sabotaging all your relationships, which he does with his best friend, and he does ultimately with Norma. And it's very painful to see on screen. But while it might have been kind of corny, I did think it was very powerful that he finds the answer to all that pain is to let go and to see that the love that his niece is having is very much mirroring the love that he shared before it was ripped away from him. And I thought the special effects at the end were cool. I cried because I liked the juxtaposition between the new relationship and the old relationship and how that conquered all the complexity and muddiness of the situation. And so I don't know. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it gave me a lot of questions about duty to one's own family and following your own youthish impulses and where you measure that against what you owe your parents, your guardians, whoever. And I really enjoyed it. But that just goes to show you
that, again,
different
we're just
interpretation.
roasting.
That's why I let you guys just run wild and I was taking it all in. And I'm like, okay.
All right, this one made me cry, but yet again, another Eastland.
No, I love that though.
But I do
think there is so much in here that I think is absolutely like hits all those points, and I think it's interesting to see our interpretations or how we respond to a movie is so different. I love to see how which themes really resonate with different audiences because it's like I can see all those things that are there in that movie, but because of XYZ thing, it doesn't land for me, right? Like it's so much there in the script and the storytelling, and I love that it is resounding with like you, and it's going to resound with other people who like those themes and stuff like that are really important to them. Not to say that the themes of like familial duty and what you owe your parents and love and grief aren't things that are important to me. It's just the like how we respond to stories is so different depending on who you are. And I think that's really interesting.
I totally agree.
Yeah. That's why I like to just let you guys run wild and listen to everything because it was like a totally different movie. But I think now the truth for me is somewhere in the middle. But I really identified with the uncle because I've made poor decisions in the aftermath of painful events in my life. And it was inspiring to see him find closure at some point, even though maybe he didn't always make the right decision, you know?
Right. I love that.
Anyway, let's talk about the best movie of the year next.
Oh, no. Oh, buddy.
All right. So State Fair centers around...
Chrysanthemum's going to come through and be like, no, actually, I did think this was the best movie.
Actually, I was at a fair when I was a child, and if you don't like the fair, you're being bigoted to my experience. That's the type of shit I just pulled.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Now you may continue with your summary.
All right. So the best movie of the year, State Fair centers around a farmer's family and their trip to, the State Fair. Slow and meandering, this slice of rural life comedy/drama's stakes never reach much higher than a fairground's wooden roller coaster track. Everyone, including the family pig, falls at least briefly in love, and here the greatest threat is returning to normal life after you've won all your blue ribbons and kissed your last sexually promiscuous showgirl.
How dark is that reality? You said that, Sarah. Think about this is the best weekend in their lives.
Yeah,
like,
that was kind
holy
of
shit.
The vibe that I got made it really dark.
This movie's so slow.
It's very slow.
It feels like 4 hours long.
It's real time at the State Fair, you know?
So I was like, how is this what is here? How is this the movie that I'm experiencing? And it was insanely popular, made tons of money.
Not surprised.
Was being able to define and show a sense of place. I guess they kind of went around the country and did a lot of filming on location, obviously, but it was like people really loved this movie, and I don't get it. For me, the only scene that even vaguely like redeems it, I guess, is the very last scene of her reuniting with the guy that she met at the State Fair, and like it's kind of that rebuking that this doesn't have to be just a weekend or whatever. This can actually be your real life. But even that is just like, oh my God, it took so long to get here. I don't know that I care. I'm also kind of
surprised that like they did a lot of shooting on location and stuff, because this movie used so many back screens. Like, I don't know if you guys noticed, but it's like so many of the shots were just like, okay, they're just on a set. So that lost a lot of the immersion for me, even though the pacing of it really did feel like you're at the fair. This is you walking around, you know?
What was it? Cut by Freddy Krueger? I mean, those cuts were insane.
When we're watching a movie this old, I have a tendency to be more forgiving of that kind of thing, just because we don't know how much has been lost on the print. So in the original release, because we're actually seeing a remaster that was, I believe, re-released in the 40s or later, there was a scene with the daughter. So we get a scene between the son and his the trapeze artist that he's having a state fair fling with.
She was the only good thing about the movie.
Our bad girl.
Yeah. I think she's so cool.
We get a scene with them where clearly they have premarital sex. There was in the original filming of this a scene between the daughter and the newspaper guy. Clearly, this is how invested I am in the movie that I know no one's name. Where you essentially, they were having a conversation off screen and there was a rumpled negligee to imply that they also, they also had premarital sex. And that was cut from the movie and it's never been recovered. So we're not really seeing the movie that was originally released at this time. I believe this was also almost a lost film. So stuff like that, where it's there's frame loss and that kind of stuff. I can't, it definitely stands out in this movie, but it could be a preservation thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. With Janet Gaynor, so she's the one who played the daughter in this one. We saw her in Seventh Heaven, which was one of our first silent movies that we watched. So I think this is the first time seeing her again, married to Gowns by Adrian, as we've just learned.
Right.
But I feel like she, to me, had the potential for the most interesting narrative and character arc. And with the ending, she kind of ended up with that anyway. But if they had focused more on her internal struggle to weigh the practicality of settling and living on the farm forever or taking a risk and wanting to move to the city, because that, I think, was probably a dilemma that was very familiar for young people at the time when people did live in rural areas more. And I would assume the popularity of this is because this resonated with the life that many people were either familiar with because they were living that life or they had left that life. But I think if they had just focused more on that, then I would have been more invested in this romance with the newspaper guy with Pat, with this feeling of oh no, this is just a fleeting, the state fair is like a stand-in for Vegas sort of thing. Anything can happen at the state fair, but then you go home and it's all over and it's just kind of like a dream. I would have been more invested if we'd gotten more time with her character and knowing that that was something that she struggled against wanting to do anyway. And then in the end, I'm glad that she left with Pat. I, like you, also liked that ending sequence where she does, she's so relieved when he actually calls, and because she has just been in a daze being wow, I fucked up, for however many days afterwards. So I was glad with that sequence. And I was just kind of I bet I would have been a lot more invested, and this would have even been more compelling if we had just focused more on those themes in the first place. But I think it spent so much time jumping between her kind of story, the brother's story, the mom with the pickles, the dad with the pig, and it just didn't focus enough on any one thing, I guess, for me.
Yeah, I feel like this is, after looking up what the reception is to this movie, this is the thing that I feel the most separation between me and whatever audience was watching this movie and just loving it, because I just don't get it. Why did people love this movie? I can see the argument of oh, we're seeing ourselves on screen because these are really one of the few portrayals of rural America that we've seen in these movies so far.
And it's
I don't
rural happy America to some extent, right? And so at this time where the Great Depression, and you're in the midst now of the Dust Bowl where agricultural communities are struggling through this might also be I remember 5 years ago when we were happy going to the state fair, something in there must have resonated. But
I don't get it.
Well,
same.
Sarah, I think you make a good point that the movie would have been improved had we dove and focused in more on the daughter character. However, I don't think you could have done that because she has what we love to see, sexy baby syndrome.
Really glad I introduced this statement.
Yes. Again, I just wanted Mae West to walk into that fair and just light it all on fire, just burn it all down with her coastal wit, because there was just not a lot going on at this fair.
Well, if I may,
Yeah, go for it, please.
She's like, loved it.
No, I mean, I didn't love it. It was good. I enjoyed it. I preferred it over Smilin Through. And I think it's because I watched it right after I watched Lady for a Day, but I didn't hate this movie. Like, I didn't have like all the points that you guys are saying. I found in the beginning, like maybe the first 15 minutes, it was kind of slow when they're introducing the character. You're like, oh, what the fuck is with this pig, this family, whatever. But I kind of liked the whole life is simple. Like, the biggest thing that these people have to look forward to is the state fair, because that's really the only time they interact with other people. And I guess it is. I mean, I didn't go to any state fairs or anything like that, but I did grow up on a ranch, and I know how isolating that can be. So the only time I would have, I guess, outside interaction was either at school or with my cousins, because I had a big family. But if it was people outside of the family, like, it was usually just from school, or if like, I don't know, there's a science fair and you have to go and do competitions with other schools, and that was the time I got to meet other kids that weren't in my direct orbit, I guess. And so like the way it ended with, you know, the sister and the brother kind of like meeting people and having this experience, like, I could relate to that, because I remember going to science fairs and talking to other kids from schools, and, you know, it was just like a dumb, you know, talking about science fair stuff. But at the end, leaving on the school bus and then knowing like, I'm probably never even going to see those people again. And I never did.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, like, it was a very simple movie, and I thought it was a good time. I had fun. I was laughing. I thought the whole thing with the pig was ridiculous, and how the pig also found love. And, you know, I just thought it was funny. Like, I did find myself laughing. Then with the sister, like, they didn't go in depth, but at the end you knew that when she was going back home, it introduced the fact that she didn't want to marry that weirdo who's like, I've been promised to you since you were this high, you know, and that weird creeper. And then when she goes back and she's like, I know I don't love him. I don't even want to be with him, but that's all I have going for me. And the brother, they didn't really spend too much time with. You knew he was already in a relationship with somebody. I just feel like the brother was being selfish. I don't know. I thought it was a simple movie. I thought it was a good time. I had fun. And I didn't expect much from a movie called State Fair. And I think it delivered exactly what it meant to do.
This one can also go on our bonus, because I know that they remade this movie as a musical.
Oh my God.
But I think this is really interesting because
does the pig sing?
Oh, I don't know. Because it's making me think of the context of me watching this movie, and it was the third movie that I watched in a day.
Oh, God.
So I watched She Done Him Wrong, Little Women, and then State Fair.
Oof.
What a descent into madness.
So I'm thinking maybe that's part of why I am so critical of this movie, is that it was just the end of a long day and it felt like purgatory, because I can totally see where you're coming from a lot of the stuff of like, there are very relatable things in this. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I usually like slice of life, slower pace sort of things. I'm not against like simple pleasures, simple storylines like that. But to me, the pacing was just still bad. Even only having watched this one movie that day, it just dragged for me.
Well, Chrysantha, I just want to say, as someone who also just experienced several people who I thought were my friends drag something that was very important to me through the mud ruthlessly, I really sympathize with your perspective on this movie. And I think you make some great points. It's a humble portrayal of middle America that is sorely lacking, and I'm sure struck a chord considering the Dust Bowl. So props to you.
Well, I'm just saying there are worse movies on. There's like two other movies that I consider are like worse than this movie.
Yeah, we watched a whole year of terrible movies.
I just want to see the Chrysantha version of this movie called Science Fair, based on your story. I'm like, I would watch that. Yeah, that sounds way more interesting, honestly.
A more compelling movie to me. Yeah. Your description.
Yeah, same.
All right, do we have anything else to say about State Fair? Are we ready to move on to our last movie?
I thought that was it.
I'm ready.
Wait.
Private Life, Henry VIII.
Oh, fuck.
Didn't y'all just watch this one?
Jesus Christ.
And it's like literally the movie that's the most up Jake's alley. I think Jake forgot we watched it because it just got siphoned away. He already had all this information in his head.
I didn't write notes on it. That's okay. I'm free balling it.
Yeah, because you don't need notes on it.
Not at all.
You don't. You basically wrote that movie. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So our last nominee / not winner, loser of the Best Picture Award is The Private Life of Henry VIII. This features Charles Laughton in a career-defining role as the titular Henry. The plot ditches serious period politics for the most part in favor of tracking the king's notorious relationships with his many wives and offers Laughton a platform to be funny, formidable, and pathetic in turns. Despite lavish sets and staging choices, the movie makes to deliver on the promise of its title by keeping its character-defining moments and bedrooms and behind closed doors.
Nice description. That was very,
Cute.
very encapsulated.
I got halfway through this movie and was like, every emotional character scene happens in a bedroom.
But here's the counterpoint I'll make to you. Is there such a thing as a private life when you are the king? And your private life is state policy?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's like the point of the movie. But I do think it is really interesting that so many of these scenes that are like revealing character turns or that kind of thing do happen oftentimes in a scene with just a single other person in what is ostensibly a more private moment.
Well, friends and family will know that I have a spectrum-y fascination with all things European history, and in particular, the English monarchy. So, as Sarah referenced, I was going into this not blind. And the cool thing about this from a historical perspective, if you do like this sort of movie, period pieces, history, English history in particular, it actually takes some unexpected turns because Anne of Cleves, who was Henry VIII's fourth wife, was this German princess who was brought over basically for political reasons to marry him. By this point, he's in his 40s, and she was a young girl, and he was set to marry her for political reasons. He had already begot a son by a previous wife, which was his life's mission. And famously, he agreed to it because his court painter, Hans Holbein, went over to Germany and painted a picture of her that was very exaggerated in terms of her good looks, so the story goes. So when she arrived, Henry very politely married her, but never consummated the relationship, and then quickly dissolved the relationship and pensioned her off with several manor houses and a large pension. However, I love what the movie does in kind of a transgressive turning the tables on this, the way that Anne of Cleves is made out to be this very wise, kind of uncouth, but
hustler.
Yeah, she hustles the king because she knows he's already chopped the head off one wife. Didn't work out for the other two wives he's had so far. She does not want to get roped into this. So she introduces herself looking as kind of disheveled and kind of gross as possible, and then just repeatedly emasculates him and throws him for a loop when they're privately together in the room, beating him in cards, which leads to that great scene of him running out the room saying, "Who can lend me some money?" because he's lost all his walking around money to his new wife. So I thought that was really cool. I mean, I enjoyed the movie overall. I thought it did a spectacular job in terms of costuming and set pieces and some of the aesthetic authenticity of that time period, which is a very vibrant and interesting time period in English history. But I did like that they had that new take on Anne of Cleves, which of all the things I've read and seen about that period, I haven't really seen that interpretation. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I liked her in this movie a lot in general. So Elsa Lanchester and Charles Laughton were married, but she was great as Anne of Cleves. And she's also the only thing I recognize her from, and I don't know if we'll see her in anything else, but she was the Bride of Frankenstein. So whenever I see her, it's just like, yes, that face, but with the Bride of Frankenstein hair. I thought Charles Laughton was also just really good in this role, like really embodied what I imagine Henry VIII was like. I don't know, kind of gave vibes of, what was the king in Game of Thrones?
Robert Baratheon.
Robert Baratheon. Yeah, which I feel like was probably modeled somewhat after that type of. I will say this. So this was the first non-U.S. film to receive the Best Picture nomination. which then made me reflect back to, the fourth year of the Oscars, where I was like, well, maybe they didn't nominate M because it wasn't American. I'm like, wow, okay, well, that clearly wasn't a rule, because so now I just got mad about the fourth year of the Oscars all over again.
Language barrier.
That's might also be a possibility, but maybe this is a direct result of people being like, okay, that year there were a bunch of movies being made internationally that was a lot better than what was nominated. So maybe we need to start looking abroad for things. But
yeah, but only very occasionally. Yeah, exactly. Because it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, I will never be a defender of the Oscar nomination slate, because I think every year it's like always insane. But yeah, it's always feels so much more a microcosm of like what is happening politically in Hollywood more than it is about what is actual good filmmaking.
Right. And like you said, this year seemed to be pretty rife with kind of period pieces as well, potentially because of what was going on, versus in the fourth year of the Oscars. I don't know if child murder ever would have necessarily been apropos to the times.
No, but I enjoyed this movie. I thought it did a good job, and it took what could be a really heavy topic, made kind of lighthearted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I really love, and I think it's funny that she's on screen for like 5 minutes, but Merle Oberon, who plays Anne Boleyn in this, is in like a completely different movie.
Yeah.
But she's fantastic in this. Apparently this kind of like launched her career. Yes. I think mostly because people thought she was incredibly gorgeous, which it's true she is, but she also is just like, she does so much with those few scenes that she has, and it kind of provides a really great opening to the movie, where it's like you have this very serious thing, and then where it's like you as the audience can interpret it as serious because of how straight and well she's playing that role of like the soon to be beheaded queen, but everything around her is kind of providing this counterpoint of like, at the actual execution, it's things like, here, I saved you a seat, and can you take your hat off because I can't see the block.
Very jovial.
So it immediately provides you with that weird kind of like tonal imbalance of like the really serious versus the ridiculous. And I think if you didn't have her delivering such a strong performance with what little she gets right there in the beginning, it wouldn't set that tone half as well, and kind of like prepare the stage essentially. She's basically Lawton's warm-up act, right? Does great work.
He's so stoic, which my understanding is that's how Anne Boleyn tried to weather that situation.
Yeah. Merle Oberon, I'm pretty sure she's the one who plays Kathy in the 1939 Wuthering Heights. So I think that was nominated, so we'll see her again. I've seen it just because my mom loves that movie, but apparently the director of this movie, William Wyler, so he was so struck by Merle Oberon's beauty that he told Carl Laemmle, because I think they were cousins or second, like related. So Carl Laemmle, who was the head of Universal at the time, he's like, you need to sign her. Like, she's going to go far. And he found out later that Carl Laemmle thought that he had taken his advice, but he accidentally signed Binnie Barnes, who was one of the other actresses in this movie.
So it was just like, oops.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, how are you going to get those names confused, first of all? But yeah, they just
Betty Boop
did a little oopsie. Yeah.
Amazing.
Exactly.
So I'd like, and you talking about that juxtaposition, Abby, between the joviality of the crowd and the seriousness of the execution, that reminded me of why I like period dramas, and in particular period dramas dealing with like monarchy and the nobility in classical times, because there's an inherent level of drama and stakes involved when politics are intertwined with, love and personal choices and things. So I like that about this movie, and I like that about movies like this in general.
I don't know that I don't know that I have a ton to say about this movie, other than the fact that I know that this won Lawton an Oscar, and I think that's super well deserved. I think this is a great platform and like a vehicle for his performance. I don't know that I have a whole heck of a lot to say about it otherwise, but he's great in it. Like has this whole monologue about like how no one is refined anymore, while he's literally like ripping into a whole chicken with his bare hands and like de-limbing it, and like it's
like his beard's getting all nasty and
stuff.
The
contrast is excellent. So it's like they give him so much of that. So much of the script is that where he like gets to do that like fun like playing contrasts, and that's so much in the movie. Like it's just constantly playing contrast of serious versus absurd, that it gives the actors a ton to do, but I don't know that it's like, I don't know that I have a whole lot to say about the movie itself other than that.
Yeah, kind of same. I kind of walked away from it being like, okay, I learned a little bit about, Henry VIII, largely with Jake's added commentary, but mostly walk away from it being like, oh, Charles Laughton seemed like he had a lot of fun with that, or at least provided a very fun performance for us to enjoy.
Yeah.
Great laugh and great. I like his ending fate, that he's just kind of this shriveled, almost hospice patient. So it was kind of like, what does it all get you in the end?
Dang.
Good movie.
I have nothing to add. I hated this movie.
I mean, that's something to add.
Yeah.
It was, oh my God, it was like nails on a chalk. It was so hard for me to get through this movie. I'm
curious how you
that.
viewed it. Like, did you view it as a more serious movie, or was some of the like comedy just not hitting for you?
There was comedy. Like, I thought I know nothing about Henry VIII. It's never interested me.
I didn't either.
So I knew he had like a lot of wives. I didn't know if he was like an asshole, if he mistreated them or whatever. I knew Anne Boleyn. Yeah, obviously she got her head chopped off. Like, I knew like surface level stuff. I mean, I thought the scene with the card playing was funny, but I don't know, like, he looked like him, the way he stood. I didn't know that that's the way King Henry actually stood too, but his legs annoyed me. But yeah, I mean, that's just like, it was.
I don't know if that insult has ever, I don't know if those words were just like, his legs annoyed me. I think that's going to be one of my favorite insults now.
It just, I don't know. Like, there was definitely points, I guess, with the humor and stuff that I'd laugh, like with the people, like in the fish market or meat market, whatever it was. I just, I don't know. Maybe it was just because the material, I don't know, something about it just, I could not, it could not keep my interest, and I was just like, I couldn't care less about this man, and he grossed me out too. Like, just watching him, I was just like, I don't know. Maybe if I had more historical context, maybe I would have something to like reference, but because I didn't, it was
Watch it with me.
Yeah, it was like in and out. I don't know. It was just, I think for me, it was just boring overall.
Feels like a real, like, one thing happens after another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Forever. Movie. The downfall of the biopic, man. Like, everyone decides they need to tell everyone's entire life story, and then it's just kind of like shapeless structure-wise, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
I think especially like if you're not there for Lawton's performance, like I can't imagine what else you're here for in this movie, because it's not like, that's the defining thing of this movie is his performance.
Yeah, it's like when I saw a picture of Henry VIII online, I was like, oh yeah, he looks exactly like him. But that's really all I had to go off of. And then like the film was super grainy, the audio was a little bit hard to hear sometimes, and I found it kind of like quiet. Like, that was one thing that I noticed with all the other films too, was that there was a lot more involvement of music. So I feel like that helped set like the scene, or like the emotion that was trying to be conveyed, just kind of like really put the audience in what was happening in the movies. But I felt like this one was definitely much more quiet and very reminiscent of like previous movies that we had seen previous years. And I felt like all the other movies we had seen had such a, to me, significant jump in like acting, storytelling, audio, visual. And so this one just like was just flat all around. But I don't know.
I do think you're right, though, that this feels like from a production standpoint, feels like an older movie compared to everything else that we watched this year. Maybe not everything else, but to a lot of the movies in terms of like how it's shot and made.
Yeah.
I think is an interesting call out.
Yeah.
I will agree that it is not as good as several of the other movies this year, but I liked it. Subject matter.
Well, anything else to say about this one?
No, I think we are ready to watch the winner tomorrow. But for the podcast listeners, it'll be
everybody else like, fuck. Welcome back, everyone. We are just wrapping up a viewing together of 1933's Best Picture Oscar winner, a film called Cavalcade. So, as always, I'm going to do my best to give a breezy overview of the movie while hitting on some of the main points for those of you that didn't have a chance to watch it, although certainly encourage our listeners to watch along with us if they have the capacity to do so. So Cavalcade is a story of an upper-class family at the turn of the 20th century. The film starts on New Year's, the year 1900, and we're introduced to Sir Robert and his wife, Jane, who live in a very nice townhouse in London, where they live with their two young boys, an older boy named Edward and a younger boy named Joey, maybe around the ages of 6 and 5, something in that area. And we're also introduced to their service wait staff who live, as was common, and as those of you who are fans of Downton Abbey will know, lived in sort of the underquarters of the house. The service staff is mostly made up of another family called the Bridges. There's Mr. Bridges, his wife, the maid, and some other miscellaneous staff. So that's what we open on. It's a very kind of idyllic scenario where Robert and Jane are expressing their gratitude to one another about what a good life they have and what a milestone they're reaching together. And they're even excited enough to wake up the boys to take in the new year with them. So it's a very nice and poignant opening, although there is a bit of an overcast in terms of the fear that Jane expresses to Robert about the fact that both he and actually Mr. Bridges, the butler in the house, have to go very soon to serve the British Empire in what's called the Boer War, which was a war that took place at that time in South Africa. White settlers in South Africa called Boers were sort of rebelling against the British Empire. And so they sent troops down there to put down that rebellion. And it ended up historically being akin to maybe like a Vietnam War or an Iraq 2003 war in our own context, in that it was a very kind of drawn out and painful conflict for the country. But in any case, the father, Sir Robert, and Mr. Bridges go off to war. They serve for a time. There's a lot of anxiety amongst their family that they leave behind, their wives and their other extended relatives worrying over their well-being. But thankfully, eventually they come back after the war is concluded on good terms for the empire. And you can tell there's been some changes. Mr. Bridges, while he was away at war, befriends another gentleman and actually purchases from him a pub, which gives him, with a little bit of financial help from his employer, Sir Robert, the opportunity to branch out from service and to move his family out of service with him. So it's a very interesting transition. The war has changed them on a personal level, but we're also seeing reflected a change in society where there's new opportunities opening up for social mobility, which is a common thing in this part of history with these seismic wars. So we jump a little bit ahead. It's around, I think, 1908 at this point. Mr. Bridges owns the pub, the former butler, and he's maybe encountering some challenges. There's a little bit of strain on the family life because he's taken to drinking. He seems to be living mentally in the Boer War even all these years later, and he's not doing the best of jobs financially in terms of covering the family's rent. So we're seeing that with this new emancipated middle-class experiences, there's a lot of instability that the family encounters, which is a challenge and a different type of challenge than what they faced in service. But in any case, there's a large family argument because Jane comes to visit the Bridges, unbeknownst to Mr. Bridges, who's out drinking with his buddies, and he comes down and sees that their former employer, the high-class Jane, is there with the family. Mrs. Bridges intentionally tried to keep him from being there because she knew she'd be embarrassed by him as a drinker. So he blows up, Jane leaves, and he kind of chases their daughter out into the street. Their young daughter, she kind of runs away from her parents fighting into the street, and Mr. Bridges chases after her, and in so doing, he gets into a brawl and then is run over by a horse and buggy and killed. So we see Mrs. Bridges despondent, obviously, over Mr. Bridges' body, but we also see their daughter dancing to kind of escape and cope with the chaos of the situation in the street because everybody is celebrating another new year, presumably. So we jump ahead again now a few years. We're now in the middle or latter part of the Edwardian era, and the families are at the beach. The other cool thing about this movie is we're seeing music transition every time jump. So they're watching kind of a pinstriped performance of some gentlemen on the beach. We're seeing now that Sir Robert and Jane's eldest son, Edward, is now engaged to their family friend's daughter, and they're sitting on the beach excitedly talking about, what a bright future exists for them as a married couple and all the endless possibilities. Edward sees a steamship and says, I'd love to take you on a boat and go around the world. The next time jump is to 1912. And again, we're seeing Edward and Edith, the young couple, probably in their early 20s, just so happy and so idyllic. And it seems like the world is their oyster at this point until we see them step away from the rail of the ship. And it says that it's the Titanic. So we're left to believe, and it's later confirmed, that they were riding on the Titanic as it sank, and it turns out they were both killed. So we jump ahead to 1914, and this is the start of World War I. And the younger brother, Joey, who's still alive, he is very excited to join in World War I, as we remember from watching All Quiet on the Western Front from the German context. There were a lot of young men around this time who didn't have a lot of life experience, and nobody was expecting or understood the nature of what the war would be. So he's excitedly telling his parents he wants to serve. Sir Robert will also need to serve as an officer, given his own experience, but he's a little bit more world weary, and both he and his wife Jane are very concerned about the well-being of their son. So before the son sets off for war, he goes out to a nightclub with some other young men who are set to go off to war. And who should he see performing at that nightclub but the daughter of the Bridges? She's now a young woman named Fanny Bridges, and she's a very talented singer and dancer at the nightclub. And Joey is just so smitten with her that he sneaks off into her dressing room after the performance. And what was a little creepy at first, he manages to turn it around, and they kind of rekindle their friendship. Well, over the course of the war, they get closer and closer. He manages to survive 4 years of the war, as there's a montage to let us know there's a passage of time. And so we come in on 1918, toward the end of the war. Joey is on shore leave, hanging out with Fanny, who's now his sweetheart. They really tempt fate, as many characters do throughout this movie. And Fanny gives him a locket, expressing how much she loves and cares for him, before he goes off for one final tour in the war. Where he meets his father before going off into battle. His father is now a general and says that they're on the verge of negotiating an armistice with the Germans. So it seems like the war is coming to an end. But of course, in those final weeks, unfortunately, Joey is killed in battle, breaking his mother's heart again, as we see her try to struggle through the crowd of all the Londoners celebrating the end of the war. But she is left to just ponder another great loss in her life as history reaches another milestone and their family experiences another tragic moment. Parallel to this, she also has a great scene that we'll probably talk about between her and the mother of Fanny, who has found out that they're together, and Mrs. Bridges suggests that they should get married, and it's a real shock to Jane's mindset, because this is a family that they were formerly employing a little over a decade ago, now maybe marrying into them. So that was an interesting tidbit that occurred as well. But after that, we have another montage, presumably throughout the 1920s. It's talking about all the great seismic social and cultural changes, kind of the loss of importance of the church in people's lives, the advent of new music and fashion, and women coming into their own, gaining the franchise and being more open in society. And while that obviously creates a lot of opportunities for older folks in society, such as Sir Robert and his wife Jane, it represents a great deal of change and, on some level, loss of the old world and the old way of life. And this is really epitomized in a musical number that towards the end of the movie, Fanny performs in another nightclub at this point, at the height of the flapper era in the 1920s, talking about the 20th century blues and how there's all this change, but there's also this sense of loss or instability that accompanies it. So that's a great capstone, and then even better is the way the movie ends. New Year's 1933, Sir Robert and his wife Jane are in the very same room, the very same position they were in 33 years ago at the start of the movie. Only now, obviously, it's just the two of them. Their sons have passed. Their service staff have moved on, living new lives. and yet they're there to look back on a lifetime together that was certainly eventful and change-filled. And while it encompassed a lot of tragedy, they seemed to be fairly content and at peace, having gotten through it together. So a poignant end to a very change-filled movie covering a large swath of history that I can imagine was very affecting for someone that watched it at that time, given that this movie came out in 1933. But in any case, that's a bit of an overview, and I'd love to open it up to you guys now to kind of get your initial reactions.
I feel like the main thing that I was thinking while we were watching it is just that this movie really encapsulates a lot of what we've seen this year, in that when we were discussing the nominees, right, as like what seemed to be popular was looking at old-timey bygone eras and war, and this movie kind of had those things in spades. But the movie itself, I don't know. I'm still processing how I felt about it overall, I think.
My opinion is that this is a conservative nationalist piece of shit movie.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
No character has any shred of interiority. Potentially the only through line, like emotional through line, is the mother Jane's like disgust with war. But I'm going to be honest, the actress is like so not great in this role that
I agree.
It's not even portrayed well. Also, the one like really, I would say, effective portion of this movie, which is the montage of the Great War, where it starts really patriotic and has and kind of just devolves into absolute horror. That's really interesting, and I think worth the celluloid that it's printed on. And then it's immediately undercut by the brother going, like, literally, anyway, yes, it's pretty rough sometimes.
Yeah.
And also, because at the very end, it also has a montage cut and filmed in the exact same way. That's basically like, modern life is scary. How terrible.
Yeah.
And it's it's bad.
Yeah. I would totally agree. Well, it's kind of like, I was so bored through much of this movie that I couldn't even be upset about a lot of things. But was, similarly very disappointed with the ending, the way that they were kind of painting it as a whole, right? That like change is bad, and the changes that we're currently seeing right in the 20s and into the early 30s are especially bad. It felt very familiar to, I guess, like a lot of conservative media that we're familiar with. Yeah. No.
Yeah, that ending sequence even manages to sneak in some like scary homosexuals, which is pretty bad.
Yeah, I rolled my eyes at that. Yep.
It was definitely boring. Like, the only good thing I can say about this movie was the acting was good. I guess.
Was it?
But other than that, like,
Question mark.
It's the only saving grace. Like, anything else was just kind of, it was just dense and boring. So, but it's funny that you guys were saying that, like, it was just kind of like conservative and all that. Cause like I was doing a little bit of research and I actually found out that this was supposedly Adolf Hitler's favorite film.
Sorry.
I saw that.
That makes total sense. Holy shit. That adds a lot of color. So hear me out, everybody. I'm not saying I agree with Hitler. Okay? I would never say that. But what I will say is I like to consume all kinds of media. And within 5 minutes of this movie starting, I was like getting strong Downton Abbey vibes, as we all mentioned to each other and all agreed. And in my estimation, Downton Abbey coupled with Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood early flick, great classic, two of the most effective examples of well put together conservative media, whether it's intentionally propagandistic or not. I find it to be well made in the sense that it is making an argument, it is creating a version of reality, and it can be very compelling to sit there and inhabit it. And, I'm a history guy, so I liked talking about this time period in history, which is in many ways so similar to our own. It became all the more striking as the movie went on. We're now 25 years into the 21st century, and this movie ends 33 years into the 20th century. So suffice to say, this is 100 years ago we're looking at. And the British Empire kind of being a stand-in for the United States. So a lot of the same challenges, insecurities, regressions, backlashes, uncertainty that we're talking about and that we're seeing manifest politically and culturally in our own context. To me, we're seeing it again here 100 years ago. And it just proves the point, which I think we've inched at different episodes thus far, about how cyclical certain things are socioeconomically and culturally. And man, Chrysantha, for you to have found out that Hitler loved this movie, I get that. And given what Hitler represented, which was a violent reassertion of traditional hierarchy, racially, sexually, nationalistically, that was built on a sense of loss or betrayal or grief for a belief that the old world had died, in the German context after World War I, in the British context with the break apart and decline of the empire. So to me, it was very interesting. I agree, Abby, the performances were pretty weak for the most part. I thought Joey was a very strange character. I just thought he was like, he seemed really happy and there was all this fucked up shit going on around him. But I don't. The movie made me think, and yeah, I think it could be used for evil, but I enjoyed watching it for that reason.
I think that's kind of why I'm still processing it, because I like things, obviously, like, and embarking on this project for the podcast, I like things that put things into context and kind of look at milestones and what was going on at the time and getting to see that play out. But to Abby's point, and kind of to your point as well, just being used for evil, right? Or being used to try and reassert that change shouldn't happen, rather than getting to celebrate the way that, like, why changes happen. So
yeah, I think it's interesting in the like aspect that you're calling out, Jake, of it being fascinating in a historical context, especially given what is happening currently. But I think in a like filmmaking context, the script is really weak. It's shot and blocked terribly. Like comparing this in terms of the shot design between this and like A Farewell to Arms. It's crazy to me that this is our Oscar winner compared to like, and I think it's damning that this is our Oscar winner for the period compared to something like I'm a Fugitive from the Chain Gang, right?
Yeah,
like
that was a much better movie
absolutely
for sure.
Wild.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would just say, I think there's value in looking at a piece of art and keeping in mind its intended audience, in the sense that if you put yourself in the position of a downwardly mobile British aristocrat in the early 20th century, there is this great sense of constant loss and kind of degradation of those Victorian values and just the absolute social domination and command that class held over all of British society, which is good that it ended. And we can all, as progressive minded people, sit here now and say that, you know, thank God that history unfolded that way.
Well, you even saying, like, keeping in mind the audience it was made for, I think part of that is what rubs me the wrong way, is it very much seems like it was made for the equivalent of, it's like the 20th century boomer who is conservative and scared of change, you know? So in the same way that I don't necessarily like media that would do the same thing today, where it's like, look how good things were and they're terrible now because these kids are crazy or millennial, you know, it's just like, it just doesn't sit right with me.
I don't know that the movie is making a total value judgment, though, because it's interesting that you guys, your sensation right away is that it's all these things are bad. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because very much Jane and Robert, as they're sitting there, yes, they're talking about the loss and the change and how different it is, but there's a contentment.
While staring straight at the camera.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. That was like, come on. That's like acting 101. Don't look at the camera. But anyway, I just felt like it was a little bit more nuanced maybe than just a total condemnation. I think by virtue of the fact that they are our main characters, we're seeing the loss aspect of it.
Well, but I think you have like Fanny in the end singing that song about, oh, how terrible the new century is. Like, she's a person who has had experienced upward mobility, and she is also mourning the past.
Right, because upward mobility is also dislocating. Progress is complex. As we've seen more recently, it lands differently. And rather than serving the purpose of making society and life more comfortable for everyone, it can do the opposite by engendering a really terrible backlash. And that's not to justify or say that backlash is okay or good. It's just, it's worth having these discussions, I think, and trying to be nuanced about it.
I think your nuance on this is more nuanced than the movie is, I guess is what I'm saying.
Maybe.
I see very little nuance in this movie. And like, there's no character from any social class that is really seems particularly benefited from the social change that is happening. And I think your reading of it is interesting and good, but I don't see that in the movie at all.
That's fair. Yeah. It's definitely more they're lamenting the loss in this movie, and I'm kind of projecting, but I found it to be
because it could have been good. Like that theming is interesting and intriguing. But I kind of agree with Abby on this one, where the movie didn't really lean into that sort of theme. It leaned more heavily into like it has an idea of what change is and a message that it wants to say about it. I will say more aggravatingly, like to this movie, when they went and they did the reveal that they were on the Titanic, they did that by showing the life preserver where it said Titanic and then it said Southampton. I'm like, any Titanic person would know that it was Liverpool. That should have been. Did they even do their research? You know? I don't know. They're just, the attention to detail in this very low. I don't
can't believe this.
Trying to steal valor from Liverpool. John Lennon would be pissed.
I can definitely understand watching this now why when Best Director was announced, why Lady for a Days Frank was like, oh, it's definitely me, because it couldn't be fucking Frank. Yeah, exactly. It couldn't be that piece of shit. You know? Yeah. But yeah, so you won Best Director as well for this movie. Or yeah.
God, Lady for a Day was such a better movie than this. I will say that.
As was Fugitive from a Chain Gang. So
yes.
So yeah, I don't know. I think this one will be pretty promptly forgotten.
You know, I was gearing up to defend this thing, and once Chrysanthemum dropped the Hitler thing, my defenses crumbled.
Well, we have at the very least, our normal 2 questions. Which ones would you guys say are still worth watching? Jake, do you want to go first, since you thought this year was a strong year?
Sure. For me, there's fewer movies that I wouldn't recommend than there are that I would. Just, I think maybe I'll do so far, and we'll let a lot of this gesticulate by the time we get to another overall ranking episode. But just kind of talking about my favorites. Fugitive from a Chain Gang. Excellent movie. Really powerful ending. Definitely recommend that. Lady for a Day made me feel a whole lot. Laughed, cried. Love that. Frank Capra doing his thing. 42nd Street was fun. A lot of fun. You know, I'm not usually a musical guy, but I thought that last number was cool. Private Life of Henry VIII. If you're a history buff, especially English history buff, and you want to see a very engaging performance from Charles Laughton, that was a fun one. She Done Him Wrong. Oh my God. Like I said before, She Done Me Right. I love that one. I love Mae West. Smilin Through. I think if you're somebody that, has, like I said before, gone through loss or struggle in their life, I identified with that aspect of it. I thought it was cute. Cavalcade. Hitler, anti-Hitler. I'm going to say Cavalcade. I thought it was worth watching. I enjoyed aspects of it. If you're a history person, you'll like to see that streamlined history. Yes, it's probably conservative propaganda, so just take it with a grain of salt. Farewell to Arms. I don't know. It was okay. It was very melodramatic. I didn't really like the movie that much, to be honest. State Fair, I thought was like boring as shit. That was one of my least favorite movies that we've watched. I know there's some disagreement about that. No shade to anybody who felt differently. And yeah, I think that's all of them.
I would say the ones that are worth watching on this list are definitely I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. Just for Paul Muni, I mean, just to see him act and how he commands the screen, so very good. I mean, even the message itself is really good. And then Lady for a Day, if you want to have like a good time, a kind of heartwarming story that ends, on a positive note. And pretty much that's it. If you want to fall asleep, you can watch Smiling Through, The Private Life of King Henry VIII, Cavalcade.
Savage.
I mean,
Jake's like, strong year for the Oscars. Chrysanthemum's like, strong year for sleep. Like, I don't know.
maybe the second part of Little Women too, but
Oh, I forgot about Little Women.
Wow.
Wow, damning.
Sorry.
I'm gonna say watch I'm a Fugitive from the Chain Gang. That's pretty much where my list ends. But if you want extras, then do A Farewell to Arms, She Done 'Em Wrong, and Little Women.
So for me, I thought I would also have a pretty short list. Definitely, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. But Lady for a Day, I really enjoyed. So I'm surprised that Abby hated it so much. That's crazy. I honestly think that's it. For me, it's I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Lady for a Day. And then if A Farewell to Arms is on, I don't think it's worth the effort to turn it off. But that's about it.
I feel like the pacing in a lot of these movies this year was rough.
I
Like,
agree.
yeah, I agree.
They're all an hour and a half to 2 hours, but a lot of them feel very long.
Mm-hmm. I think next year at the Oscars, they introduced the category for best editing. So I'm hoping that we're going to see, some actual, like, I
Maybe
don't
they
know,
were like,
tighter
we
movies.
need to encourage.
Yeah,
editing.
exactly. All right. Well, I think we already know the answer to this, but I'm going to do our rounds anyway. Do we think Cavalcade deserved Best Picture winner for this year?
no, yeah.
No.
I'm also a no, but what would you guys pick? I'm kind of curious if we're unanimous on
Good question.
what we would choose.
I mean, for me, it's got to be I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang.
Mhm.
I think Paul Muni's performance is excellent. I think that the script is really strong. I think they're also doing some interesting things with how it's shot. And also they have all those cool montages for showing the passage of time. So I think it's like strong in kind of as a whole production.
Yeah, I second everything pretty much that Abby said.
I think that I'm a Fugitive of the Chain Gang is the best movie and certainly the most modern feeling movie. But I had a better time watching Later for a Day. And for me, movies, I seek out what elicits the strongest feelings in me. And that definitely did this year.
But okay, so last year you tried to make Grand Hotel all about the cinematic achievements and not about what we enjoyed because you didn't want 5-star Final to win. And now I'm seeing a little bit of a hypocrisy here. Being like, well, I liked Lady for a Day most, so it needs to win. I think I also enjoyed Lady for a Day most out of the ones that I watched, but I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang kind of stayed with me the most. So even on an emotional level, I think both are really good. But in terms of Best Picture, I probably would also go for I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang just because it did so much and it was just such a solid, well-rounded film. Well, seems like this year ended on a low note, unfortunately. Hopefully next year will be better. So join us next year. Why don't you think so? Because the Hays Code? No, you don't think this one?
I thought it was a good year, but that's okay.
Well, but the winner was like not that great.
No, I agree.
You know.
The winner wasn't great.
But then as I was saying that, I do remember that Hays Code kicks in more significantly. So I guess we'll see. I'm curious to see how people get around certain things, though. I'm sure we'll see more innuendo and all of the other things that we've talked about, how people get around censorship. So it might still hopefully be really interesting from that perspective. But next year for the 7th Academy Awards, the nominees are, get ready, The Barretts of Wimpole Street, Cleopatra, Flirtation Walk, The Gay Divorcee, Here Comes the Navy, The House of Rothschild, It Happened One Night, Imitation of Life, One Night of Love, The Thin Man, Viva Villa, and The White Parade. Might even be Viva Via. Viva Via. Not sure which one it is. I don't. There's so many movies, you guys.
Can I just grab the low-hanging fruit and put out the hope that The Gay Divorcee is just a direct sequel of The Divorcee?
Yes.
But a gay couple. That
I
would be
would
great.
love that so much. I'd be like, nice. Hays Code can eat shit, basically. But yeah, join us next time for, I'm sure, lengthy discussion over all of these movies.